Welcome to Crime Stories for Sleep. Before we begin tonight's story, I'd like to ask you, where are you listening from right now, and what time is it there? Take a moment to notice your surroundings, settle in, and let your body relax as we begin this journey together. The town of Millbrook rests in a valley where morning mist clings to the streets long after sunrise, wrapping around the old brick buildings like gentle fingers reluctant to let go. The river that gave the town its name flows steadily past weathered mill wheels that no longer turn, their wooden spokes darkened by decades of rain and neglect. On quiet mornings, when the world feels suspended between sleep and waking, you can almost hear the echo of what this place once was. Main Street stretches for 6 blocks, lined with storefronts that have changed hands so many times their histories blur together like watercolors left in rain. The bakery at the corner of Elm and Main still opens before dawn, just as it has for 70 years, though the hands that knead the dough now belong to the 3rd generation of the same family. The scent of fresh bread mingles with the morning air, creating a sense of continuity that the townspeople have learned to treasure without quite understanding why. Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell has lived in the same house on Sycamore Street for 43 years, and each morning she waters the roses that climb the white picket fence her late husband painted every spring. She moves slowly now, her arthritis making each step deliberate, but the routine remains unchanged. The roses bloom faithfully each June, deep red petals that seem to hold secrets in their folded layers. Eleanor has always wondered about the previous owners, about why they planted roses in soil that seemed too rich, too dark, as if it had been disturbed and carefully tended in ways that went beyond simple gardening. The morning joggers pass her fence at precisely 7:15, their footsteps creating a rhythm on the sidewalk that has become as predictable as the sunrise. There's Dr. Matthews from the medical clinic, his gray hair catching the early light, and Sarah Chun, the librarian, who moved to Millbrook 3 years ago and still looks around as if she's seeing the town for the first time. They nod politely to Eleanor, these early risers who share the quiet hours when the town feels most like itself. Unguarded and peaceful behind the library, where the old cemetery stretches toward the woods, the groundskeeper tends to graves that tell the story of Millbrook in weathered stone and faded bronze. Some headstones date back to the 1800s, when the mill was new and the town was full of hope and industry. Others are more recent, marking the lives of people who chose to stay, who found something in this quiet place worth preserving. The groundskeeper, a man named Thomas who speaks little but observes much, has noticed patterns in the burial records that he keeps to himself, small inconsistencies that might mean nothing, or might mean everything. The children who walk to school each morning along Maple Avenue pass a house that has stood empty for nearly a decade. The windows are boarded, the garden overgrown, but the mailbox still bears the name Whitmore in faded black letters. Local teenagers sometimes dare each other to approach the front door, but they never linger long. There's something about the way the shadows fall across the porch, something about the silence that feels too complete, as if the house is holding its breath. Mrs. Patterson, who runs the small grocery store, remembers the Whitmores well. They were a quiet family, she recalls, the kind who kept to themselves, but were always polite when they came in for milk and bread. The father worked at the mill before it closed, and the mother tended a garden that was the envy of the neighborhood. Their daughter, Anna, had been a few years older than the other children, a serious girl with dark hair who seemed to carry adult worries in her young eyes. One autumn, they simply weren't there anymore. No moving trucks, no goodbye visits, just empty windows and a silence that settled over the house like dust. The older residents of Millbrook have grown, comfortable with such mysteries. Small towns, they know, collect secrets the way addicts collect forgotten belongings. Some are harmless, like the story of the merchant who buried gold coins somewhere along the riverbank, or the rumor that the old mill contains a hidden room where bootleggers once stored their wares. Others settle deeper into the town's consciousness, becoming part of the landscape in ways that are felt rather than spoken. The antique shop on Main Street, run by a woman named Grace who moved to Millbrook from the city 15 years ago, contains items that tell fragments of these stories. There's a music box that plays a melancholy waltz, donated by someone who wanted to remain anonymous. A set of china painted with tiny blue flowers, missing only one cup. A leather journal with entries that stop abruptly in the middle of what seems to be an important week. Grace has learned not to ask too many questions about the items people bring her, understanding that sometimes letting go requires a certain kind of discretion. The river continues its patient journey through the town, carrying leaves and small branches toward distant places that Millbrook residents sometimes imagine but rarely visit. In the evenings, when the mill wheel catches the last light of day, the water creates patterns that seem almost intentional, as if the river itself is part of the town's quiet conspiracy to preserve, something that might be lost if examined too closely. Dr. Matthews, during his evening walks, often pauses at the bridge that spans the narrowest part of the river. He's been the town's physician for 20 years, tending to scraped knees and chronic conditions, delivering babies and comforting families through their final goodbyes. In his files, locked away in the clinic, are medical records that sometimes raise questions he's learned not to pursue. Small inconsistencies, unexplained absences, injuries that don't quite match the explanations given. He tells himself that every small town has its share of domestic troubles, its private struggles that are better left private. Young families who have moved to Millbrook in recent years are drawn by the safety, the sense of community, the way children can still ride bicycles without supervision and come home when the streetlights flicker on. They organize block parties and holiday celebrations, creating new traditions that layer over the older, deeper patterns that have shaped this place. Their laughter and energy bring life to streets that sometimes seem to echo with older, quieter voices. Sarah Chun, organizing the library's collection of local history, has found herself fascinated by the gaps in the town's official records. There are years when the local newspaper published irregularly, periods when the town council minutes contain obvious omissions, and photographs in the Historical Society's collection that show people whose names no one seems to remember. She works carefully, respectfully, understanding that preserving history sometimes means accepting that certain stories may never be fully told. The seasons turn in Millbrook with a gentleness that makes change feel natural rather than disruptive. Spring brings the smell of fresh earth and blooming fruit trees. Summer stretches long and lazy, with children catching fireflies and adults sitting on porches until well after dark. Autumn paints the surrounding hills in colors that seem too beautiful to be real, and winter wraps the town in snow that muffles sound and makes everything feel even more peaceful than usual. In this rhythm of seasons and years, the past and present blur together in ways that feel comfortable rather than troubling. The town has learned to carry its secrets gently, like precious cargo that must be protected but need not be examined. The people who choose to stay, who make their lives here, seem to understand intuitively that some truths are better left to rest, that some stories are meant to be felt rather than fully known. As evening settles over Millbrook, lights begin to appear in windows, creating warm squares of gold against the gathering darkness. Families sit down to dinner, children do homework at kitchen tables, and the older residents settle into their evening routines with the satisfaction of another day peacefully completed. The river continues its quiet journey, the empty houses keep their silent watch, and the town prepares for another night of dreams that may contain echoes of stories too old and too deep to be spoken aloud. Mist will return with tomorrow's dawn, wrapping around the streets and buildings like a familiar embrace, and Millbrook will wake to another day of gentle routines and carefully maintained peace. The secrets will remain where they have always been, woven into the fabric of daily life so completely that they have become part of what makes this place feel like home to those who understand that some mysteries are meant to be lived with rather than Solved. Margaret Sullivan tends her garden with the same careful attention her mother showed to the roses that once bloomed behind their house on Oak Street. 3 generations of Sullivan women have lived in Millbrook, each adding their own touches to the traditions passed down like family heirlooms. Margaret's grandmother spoke often of the old days, when the mill employed half the town and Main Street bustled with commerce. But there were certain subjects she approached with careful silence, conversations that would drift toward uncomfortable territory before being gently redirected towards safer ground. The Sullivan family arrived in Millbrook in 1952, when Margaret's grandfather took a position as the mill's assistant manager. They purchased a house from the Carmichael family, who had decided quite suddenly to relocate to the West Coast for reasons that were never fully explained to the neighbors. The house came furnished, which was unusual, and Margaret's grandmother had often mentioned how some of the furniture seemed too fine, too personal to have been willingly left behind. James Whitmore, whose empty house still draws curious glances from school children, had once been Margaret's neighbor. Their backyards bordered each other, separated only by a line of lilac bushes that bloomed purple and fragrant each May. Margaret remembers Anna Whitmore as a quiet child who spent hours reading under the old apple tree, a girl who seemed to observe the adult world with an intensity that made the grown-ups uncomfortable. The Whitmore family had traditions too, but theirs were different, quieter, involving long walks along the river and whispered conversations that stopped when others approached. The Chun family represents Millbrook's newer residents, but Sarah has discovered through her work at the library that her connection to the town runs deeper than she initially realized. Her great-uncle had passed through Millbrook in the 1970s, working for a surveying company that was documenting property boundaries for some kind of legal settlement. His notes, discovered in a box of family papers after his death, contained detailed observations about the town and its residents, including several mentions of discrepancies between official property records and the actual use of certain parcels of land. Dr. Matthews carries the medical history of 3 generations of Millbrook families in his files, a responsibility he takes seriously but sometimes finds burdensome. The Patterson family, who have run the grocery store since the 1960s, show patterns of stress-related ailments that seem to spike during certain times of year, particularly in late October. The elderly Mr. Hendricks, who lives alone in a house filled with newspapers and old photographs, has been treated for recurring nightmares and insomnia for over a decade, conditions that began shortly after he retired from his position as the town's unofficial historian. The Hartwell family history is written in the careful maintenance of their property, in the way Eleanor tends her roses and preserves the house exactly as her husband left it. Robert Hartwell had worked at the mill during its final years, staying on until the very end to help with the complicated process of closing down operations that had defined the town for over a century. He had spoken little about those final months, but Eleanor noticed how he would sometimes stop mid-sentence when discussing his work, his eyes focusing on something beyond the present moment, as if he was seeing scenes that existed only in memory. The Murphy family, whose farm occupies the valley's fertile bottom land, has been connected to Millbrook since before the town had a name. 4 generations of Murphys have worked the same fields, but family stories speak of difficult years when the farm struggled, when unusual financial arrangements kept them afloat during times when other family operations failed. Old Timothy Murphy, now in his 80s, sometimes hints at debts that were forgiven under circumstances he prefers not to discuss, obligations that were settled in ways that didn't involve banks or lawyers. Grace Kim, who runs the antique shop, has become an informal collector of family stories through the items people bring to sell. The objects themselves tell fragments of lives lived in Millbrook, but the circumstances surrounding their sale often reveal more than the sellers intend. Families clearing out homes after funeral services, relatives dealing with estates that contain unexpected complications, people who need money quickly and quietly. Grace has developed an intuitive understanding of when to ask questions and when to simply accept what is offered without inquiry. The Brennan family moved to Millbrook in the early 2000s, drawn by the town's reputation for safety and community involvement. They purchased the old Carmichael house, which had changed hands several times since the Sullivans moved out, and spent 2 years renovating it completely. During the renovation, they discovered a collection of letters hidden in the walls, correspondence that suggested the Carmichaels had left Millbrook not by choice but under some kind of pressure that was never made clear. The Brennans, being newcomers who valued their acceptance in the community, decided to let the past remain in the past. Sarah Chen's research has revealed that many of Millbrook's established families share connections that go back further than their surface interactions might suggest. Property deeds show unusual patterns of ownership transfer, often involving sales at prices well below market value or complicated arrangements that seem designed to obscure the actual financial transactions. Census records from different decades show discrepancies in family sizes and compositions that suggest people sometimes left town without their departures being officially recorded. The elderly residents who gather each morning at the diner on Main Street represent a living archive of the town's memory, but their conversations follow careful patterns that respect certain boundaries. Mrs. Patterson will discuss any aspect of running the grocery business, but she becomes quietly evasive when asked about specific families who suddenly stop shopping there. Thomas, the cemetery groundskeeper, knows the burial records better than anyone, but he has never publicly discussed the graves that were relocated from the old cemetery to make room for the library expansion, or what was discovered during that process. Dr. Matthews has observed that certain medical conditions seem to run in families in ways that don't follow typical genetic patterns, as if shared experiences rather than shared DNA were creating similar symptoms across generations. Sleep disorders, anxiety, and a particular kind of chronic pain that doesn't respond well to conventional treatment appear with unusual frequency among the families who have lived in Millbrook the longest. When he suggests that patients might benefit from talking to someone outside the medical profession, they often decline in ways that suggest the problems they're dealing with aren't the kind that can be easily discussed with strangers. The younger families, the recent arrivals who are raising children and building new lives in Millbrook, bring fresh energy to community events and school activities, but they also sometimes notice undercurrents they can't quite understand. Parent-teacher conferences where certain topics are avoided, neighborhood gatherings where conversations pause when particular names are mentioned, and a subtle but persistent sense that the town's social dynamics are shaped by knowledge they don't share. Margaret Sullivan, working in her garden on quiet afternoons, sometimes finds herself remembering conversations from her childhood. Adult discussions that stopped when children entered the room. Whispered phone calls that her parents took in the basement where voices wouldn't carry. She has learned to live comfortably with the understanding that every family carries private burdens, that the boundaries between what can be spoken and what must remain unspoken are part of what creates the trust that holds communities together. Families of Millbrook have woven their lives together across decades of shared experiences, creating a social fabric that is both supportive and protective. They attend each other's weddings and funerals, celebrate holidays together, and provide help during times of crisis. But they also understand that certain kinds of help come with obligations that extend far beyond simple neighborliness. The bonds that connect them are strengthened by what they choose not to discuss as much as by what they share openly. As autumn settles over the town and families prepare for another winter of long evenings and intimate gatherings, the patterns that have sustained Millbrook for generations continue to evolve slowly, carefully, with the patience of people who understand that some changes are best made gradually, that some truths are best approached slowly, and that some stories are best told through the accumulated weight of small, daily kindnesses rather than through dramatic revelations that might disturb the peace that everyone has worked so hard to preserve. Asterisk, Volume 3, Forgotten Corners, the Basement beneath the library contains more than books that have fallen out of circulation. Sarah Chun discovered this during her first winter in Millbrook, when a water leak in the main reading room forced her to relocate several collections to the lower level. Behind shelves of mildewed novels and outdated reference materials, she found file cabinets that had been forgotten during the building's conversion from its original purpose as the town hall. The documents inside told stories that didn't quite match the official history. Displayed in the library's local heritage section, asterisk, property transfer records from the 1970s showed a pattern of land sales that seemed to follow no logical economic pattern. Valuable waterfront parcels had been sold for nominal amounts, while less desirable lots had commanded prices that suggested some kind of premium was being paid for reasons not documented in the public filings. The signatures on these documents belonged to family Sarah was beginning to recognize, names that appeared repeatedly in different contexts, as if the same small group of people had been involved in managing most of the town's significant transactions during that period. The old Murphy farmhouse, visible from the library's back windows, contains an entire wing that has been boarded up for as long as anyone can remember. Timothy Murphy, when asked about it during casual conversations, explains that the rooms were damaged by a fire in the 1960s and were never properly repaired. But the roof over that section of the house shows no signs of fire damage, and the windows, though covered, appear to be intact behind their wooden barriers. Grace, from the antique shop, once mentioned receiving a call from someone claiming to represent the Murphy family, asking if she would be interested in purchasing furniture from the closed wing. But when she contacted Timothy directly, he seemed genuinely surprised by the inquiry. The Whitmore house, standing empty on Maple Avenue, draws attention, not just because of its abandonment, but because of details that become apparent only to those who observe it over time. The mail slot shows signs of recent use, though no mail is ever delivered there. The small garden behind the house, despite being untended for years, contains plants that shouldn't survive without care, as if someone were maintaining them during the early morning hours when the neighborhood is still asleep. Margaret Sullivan, whose kitchen window offers a partial view of the Whitmore backyard, has mentioned seeing lights there on winter evenings, but when she looks more carefully, the house appears as dark and empty as always. The basement of the antique shop reveals the complexity of Grace's role in the town's quiet ecosystem. Beyond the visible inventory of furniture and collectibles, she maintains a storage area for items that people have brought to her with specific instructions about their eventual disposal. Some are to be held for a certain number of years before being sold. Others are never to be sold at all, merely kept safe and dry until further notice. Grace has learned not to examine these items too closely, understanding that her function sometimes extends beyond simple commerce into more delicate territory. Behind the medical clinic, Dr. Matthews maintains files that don't follow standard medical record-keeping practices. These documents, locked in a cabinet separate from his regular patient files, contain information about medical treatments that were provided without the usual insurance documentation, care that was given to people who may not have been officially residing in Millbrook at the time. The records suggest a pattern of temporary residents who received medical attention during brief stays in town. People who were recovering from conditions that weren't fully explained in the documentation that exists. The cemetery's maintenance building contains more than just groundskeeping equipment. Thomas keeps detailed records that go beyond the official burial registry. Notes about grave sites that have been visited by people who don't appear to be family members. Observations about flowers and memorial items that are left by individuals who arrive very early in the morning or very late in the evening. Some graves receive attention that far exceeds what would be expected from distant relatives, while others that should be tended by surviving family members show signs of careful neglect, as if those responsible for their care have been deliberately avoiding them. The river that flows through Millbrook has carved channels and created small islands that aren't visible from the main bridges or the areas where residents typically walk. Sarah discovered this during a summer afternoon when she decided to follow the water's course beyond the familiar boundaries of the town center. Upstream from the mill, where the river bends through a section of woods that belongs to the Murphy farm, there are signs of old construction, concrete foundations that suggest buildings once stood along the riverbank, but were removed so thoroughly that they don't appear on any historical maps of the area. The mill itself, though officially closed and sealed, shows evidence of use that doesn't match its abandoned status. The parking area, while overgrown, contains tire tracks that seem relatively fresh, and some of the boarding on the lower windows has been recently replaced, using materials that don't quite match the weathered wood installed when the facility was first closed. Dr. Matthews, during his evening walks, has noticed that the mill's electric meter continues to show minimal usage, as if some basic systems were still being maintained despite the building's official status as a derelict property. The old Carmichael house, now owned by the Brennan family, retains architectural features that suggest its original construction was more extensive than what currently exists. The basement contains bricked-up doorways that would have led to additional rooms, and the exterior walls show indications that the building once extended further in several directions. The renovation work that the Brennans undertook revealed not just the hidden letters, but also evidence of structural changes that had been made sometime in the past, modifications that reduce the building's footprint in ways that don't align with typical home improvement projects. Mrs. Patterson's grocery store operates from a building that was constructed as part of a larger commercial complex, but the adjoining structures were demolished in the 1980s for reasons that aren't well documented in the town's planning records. The demolition left the grocery store with an unusually large basement that extends under what is now a small parking lot, and Mrs. Patterson has mentioned that the lower level contains storage areas she doesn't use because they seem to connect to spaces that extend beyond her property line. The diner on Main Street, where the elderly residents gather each morning, occupies the ground floor of a building that once housed several businesses and a few small apartments on the upper level. The second and third floors have been empty for decades, but the building's owner maintains the utilities and insurance as if the space were still in use. The diner's staff occasionally hears sounds from the upper floors that suggest someone is moving around up there, but investigations have never revealed any evidence of unauthorized occupancy. Grace has developed relationships with estate sale companies and auctioneers in neighboring towns, arrangements that allow her to acquire items that might otherwise attract unwanted attention if they were sold locally. These purchases often involve collections that once belonged to former Millbrook residents, people whose belongings ended up dispersed to distant locations under circumstances that weren't entirely clear. Through these connections, Grace has been able to return certain items to their original community context, preserving pieces of the town's history that might otherwise have been lost forever. The patterns that emerge from these forgotten corners of Millbrook suggest a community that has developed sophisticated methods for managing information and preserving privacy. Physical spaces, legal documents, and social arrangements all seem designed to provide multiple layers of discretion for activities and relationships that require careful handling. The town has learned to maintain its peace by creating spaces for complexity, areas where official records and public knowledge don't necessarily align with the full reality of what has occurred over the decades. Sarah's work at the library has given her access to more of these hidden layers than most residents encounter, but she has come to understand that her role involves preserving what can be safely preserved while respecting boundaries that exist for reasons she may never fully understand. The forgotten corners of Millbrook tell stories that are important to the town's identity, but they are stories that must be approached with patience, discretion, and an acceptance that some information is meant to remain in the shadows where it has found a safe and permanent home. Asterisk. The summer of 1978 began like many others in Millbrook, with the mill running at capacity and families settling into the comfortable rhythms that defined warm weather in the valley. Children spent long days at the swimming hole upstream from the mill wheel. Teenagers worked part-time jobs that would help pay for college in distant cities, and adults tended gardens that promised abundant harvests. It was a season that should have been remembered for its ordinary pleasures, but instead it became the quiet turning point that changed the town's relationship with its own history. Anna Whitmore was 14 that summer, old enough to work part-time at the library, but still young enough to believe that adults generally told the truth about important things. She had always been a serious child, more comfortable with books than with other children, and she spent her afternoons helping the librarian organize collections and maintain the reading room that served as the town's informal community center. It was work that suited her careful nature and gave her access to conversations that adults had when they thought teenagers weren't really listening. The mill was experiencing difficulties that summer, though the nature of the problems wasn't being discussed openly. There had been meetings between the mill's management and representatives from companies that no one seemed to recognize. Men in expensive suits who drove cars with license plates from states that seemed far removed from Millbrook's concerns. James Whitmore, Anna's father, worked in the mill's administrative offices, handling payroll and inventory records that gave him insight into operations that weren't visible to the workers on the production floor. Dr. Matthews was newer to Millbrook then, having recently completed his medical training and taken over the practice from the retiring physician who had served the community for nearly 40 years. The transition had gone smoothly, with most residents accepting the young doctor's modern methods and genuine concern for their well-being. But that summer brought medical situations that didn't fit the pattern of routine care that he had expected when he chose to practice in a small, stable community. There were people arriving in town who weren't exactly visitors and weren't exactly residents. Individuals who needed medical attention, but couldn't provide the usual information about insurance and emergency contacts. Dr. Matthews found himself treating injuries and illnesses that suggested these patients had been living under conditions of considerable stress, and their reluctance to discuss their circumstances indicated that their presence in Millbrook was connected to circumstances that required careful discretion. Margaret Sullivan was 11 that summer, old enough to understand that something unusual was happening, but too young to interpret the adult conversations that suddenly became more frequent and more private. Her parents had begun having discussions after she went to bed. Conversations conducted in voices too low to be overheard, but urgent enough to carry the emotional weight that suggested important decisions were being made. The Sullivan family had been planning to take a vacation that August, but the trip was canceled without explanation, and instead they spent the remaining summer weeks working on home improvement projects that seemed designed to keep the family close to Millbrook during a time when other families were beginning to travel more frequently to visit relatives in other states. The Murphy farm, which had always operated with the seasonal rhythms of agricultural work, began showing patterns of activity that didn't correspond to typical farming schedules. Trucks arrived at unusual hours, and sections of the property that had never been used for cultivation were suddenly being prepared for purposes that weren't apparent to the neighbors, who could observe the work from a distance. Timothy Murphy, who had always been willing to discuss his farming operations with anyone who showed interest, became notably evasive when asked about the changes being made to his land use. Anna Whitmore, working at the library, began noticing that certain books and documents were being checked out by people she didn't recognize, individuals who didn't seem to be from Millbrook, but who appeared to have legitimate library privileges. The materials they requested dealt with local history, property records, and geological surveys of the area, research that seemed more intensive than what would be expected from casual visitors or seasonal residents. When she mentioned this pattern to the head librarian, she was told that the library served several communities and that researchers sometimes traveled considerable distances to access historical collections that weren't available elsewhere. The changes at the mill became more apparent as the summer progressed. though they were changes that could only be noticed by people who were paying careful attention to details. Certain areas of the facility were being modified in ways that didn't seem related to normal maintenance or production improvements. New security measures were implemented that went beyond what would be necessary to protect equipment and inventory. And the flow of visitors continued, with meetings that lasted well into the evening and often resumed early the next morning. James Whitmore's position in the mill's administrative offices gave him access to information that began to create a picture he wasn't sure he wanted to understand. The financial arrangements that were keeping the mill operational weren't coming through the usual corporate channels or government programs that were designed to support rural industries. Instead, the funding seemed to be connected to agreements that involved not just the mill's operations but also the use of other properties around Millbrook, arrangements that extended beyond simple business relationships into areas that seemed to require the kind of discretion that James had never previously associated with his work. Dr. Matthews found that his medical practice was expanding in ways that required him to develop new kinds of professional relationships. He was asked to provide care without the usual documentation, to make house calls to locations outside the normal boundaries of his practice, and to maintain patient confidentiality under circumstances that went well beyond the privacy expectations of typical small-town medicine. The requests came from people who seemed to have authority, but who weren't part of the formal government or business structures that he had expected to encounter in his professional life. The summer ended with changes that were both obvious and subtle, transformations that affected everyone in Millbrook but weren't discussed in the straightforward way that communities usually process shared experiences. The mill continued to operate, but under arrangements that weren't fully explained to the workers or the community. Several families had decided to relocate, departing without the extended goodbye rituals that usually accompanied moves from a close-knit town. And new people had arrived, individuals who integrated into the community's daily life but maintained privacy about their backgrounds and their reasons for choosing to settle in Millbrook. Anna Whitmore began her sophomore year of high school that fall with a growing awareness that the adult world contained complexities that weren't addressed in the classroom discussions about citizenship and community responsibility that were part of her social studies curriculum. The conversation she overheard at the library, the changes in her father's demeanor when he came home from work, and the subtle shifts in how neighbors interacted with each other all suggested that Millbrook was adapting to circumstances that were significant but not openly acknowledged. The autumn brought its usual beauty to the valley, with forests turning brilliant colors and harvests that reflected the generous growing season. But the town's annual fall festival was organized differently that year, with certain traditional activities being modified or eliminated without clear explanations. The celebration was still enjoyable, still brought the community together for shared food and entertainment, but the underlying social dynamics reflected the changes that had been occurring throughout the summer in ways that created new patterns of inclusion and exclusion. By winter, the adaptations had become routine, incorporated into the town's daily life so smoothly that newcomers wouldn't have noticed anything unusual about the way Millbrook functioned. But for the residents who had experienced the transition, the season brought a deeper understanding of how communities could change while maintaining their essential character, how people could accept new realities without abandoning the values and relationships that made their shared life meaningful and sustainable. The snow that fell that winter covered Millbrook with the same peaceful blanket that had marked countless previous seasons, but underneath the familiar white landscape, the town had acquired new depths, new layers of complexity that would shape its future in ways that were already becoming invisible to casual observation. The echoes from that transformative summer would continue to resonate through the decades that followed, becoming part of the foundation on which future generations would build their own understanding of what it meant to call Millbrook home. Asterisk. The river that winds through Millbrook carries more than water from the distant mountains to the downstream valleys where it eventually joins larger waterways on their journey to the sea. In the early morning hours, when mist rises from the surface and creates temporary veils across the landscape, the water moves with a patience that seems almost deliberate, as if it understands its role in maintaining the delicate balance that keeps this community stable and secure. Upstream from the mill, where the river bends through sections of forest that have never been fully cleared for agriculture or development, the water carves channels through terrain that has remained largely unchanged since the first settlers arrived in the valley. These wooded areas, owned by various families but managed as informal common spaces, provide sanctuary not just for wildlife, but for human activities that require privacy and careful timing to avoid unwanted observation. Sarah Chun discovered the walking trails during her second spring in Millbrook, when the winter's confinement had left her eager for outdoor exercise that went beyond the predictable routes through the town's residential neighborhoods. The paths that follow the river's course are not marked on any official recreation maps, but they are clearly maintained by people who understand the importance of providing access without advertising the destination. The trails lead to clearings that have been carefully preserved, open spaces that feel natural but show subtle signs of human management in the way vegetation has been controlled and sightlines have been maintained. These clearings serve as gathering places for activities that don't require formal permits or public scheduling, meetings that bring together people who share concerns and responsibilities that extend beyond their visible roles in the community's daily life. Dr. Matthews has walked these trails often, finding that the peaceful environment provides the kind of thinking space that his medical practice sometimes requires when he's dealing with professional situations that can't be resolved through standard procedures. The natural setting offers perspective on problems that are complicated by human factors that go beyond simple medical diagnosis and treatment, circumstances that require understanding of relationships and histories that aren't documented in any patient files. The Murphy Farm extends into forested areas that connect with these river trails, creating a network of private land that can be accessed without using public roads or passing through areas where movement might be noticed by casual observers. Timothy Murphy has maintained this land not for traditional farming purposes, but as a resource for community needs that arise periodically and require places where people can meet, store materials, or conduct activities that benefit from natural concealment. During the summer months, when the river runs low and exposes gravel bars that are normally underwater, evidence becomes visible of human activity that spans many decades. Foundation stones from structures that were dismantled and removed, metal objects that were weighted and sunk in areas where the current would gradually move them downstream, and modifications to the riverbank that were designed to control erosion while also managing what kinds of evidence might eventually surface during periods of drought. The woods themselves contain features that aren't immediately apparent to casual hikers but become obvious to people who spend time there regularly and learn to read the landscape for signs of past use. Trees that were planted in patterns rather than growing naturally, clearings that were created by selective cutting rather than natural processes, and paths that connect specific locations in ways that suggest deliberate planning rather than random development by people simply trying to move through the forest. Grace, from the antique shop, sometimes takes walks along these trails when she needs to think through complex situations that arise in her business, circumstances where the items people bring her carry emotional and practical weight that goes beyond their simple monetary value. The quiet environment helps her consider how to handle these transactions with the discretion and sensitivity that her role in the community requires, decisions that affect not just the immediate buyer and seller, but the broader network of relationships that depend on her professional judgment. Wildlife in these areas has adapted to human presence in ways that suggest generations of coexistence rather than the wariness that would be expected in truly wild spaces. Deer, raccoons, and smaller animals show familiarity with human voices and movement that indicates regular, non-threatening contact with people who visit these woods for purposes that don't involve hunting or other activities that would create fear or disruption. Seasonal changes in the forest create different opportunities for the kinds of human activities that these spaces support. Spring flooding can temporarily conceal or reveal evidence that has been deliberately placed or accidentally lost, while winter's bare branches provide sight lines that are blocked during the growing season, requiring careful timing for activities that depend on visual privacy. Margaret Sullivan has learned to appreciate these wooded areas as places where she can process the complex emotions that come with living in a community where family loyalty sometimes conflicts with personal moral comfort. The natural setting provides a context for thinking through situations where the right choice isn't always clear, where protecting people she cares about might require accepting circumstances she doesn't fully understand or entirely approve of. The old logging roads that crisscross the forest date back to the mill's more active years, when timber harvesting was a significant part of the local economy. These roads are still maintained well enough to allow vehicle access when necessary, but they've been allowed to grow over just enough to discourage casual exploration by visitors who might be looking for scenic drives or hunting areas that don't require extensive hiking. Thomas, the cemetery groundskeeper, uses these forest roads to access areas where he maintains memorial sites that aren't part of the official cemetery grounds. These informal burial places serve families whose loved ones couldn't be interred in consecrated ground for reasons related to the circumstances of their deaths or the legal complications that surrounded their presence in the community during their final days. The river's flow patterns have been subtly modified over the years through careful placement of stones and logs that direct the current in ways that serve practical purposes while appearing entirely natural to anyone who isn't specifically looking for signs of human intervention. These modifications ensure that seasonal flooding affects only the areas where temporary inundation serves useful purposes, while protecting locations where rising water could create problems that would be difficult to explain or resolve. Anna Whitmore, during the final summer her family spent in Millbrook, spent many hours walking these trails and sitting by the river, trying to understand how the place she had always called home could contain realities that seemed so different from the simple, honest community life she had believed defined small-town existence. The natural setting provided a space where she could process the growing awareness that adult responsibilities sometimes involve making choices that couldn't be easily categorized as right or wrong. The forest contains seasonal camps that are used by people who need temporary housing arrangements that don't require formal leases or utility connections. These camps are simple but comfortable, designed to provide basic shelter and privacy for individuals who are transitioning between different phases of their relationship with the Millbrook community. People who need time and space to adapt to new circumstances without the scrutiny that would come with more visible living arrangements. Wildlife patterns in the area reflect the human activity that occurs there, with animal movements and feeding areas adapting to schedules and locations that minimize conflict between natural processes and human needs. This coexistence has developed over decades of careful management by people who understand that successful concealment requires working with natural systems rather than against them. Fishing spots along the river serve practical purposes beyond recreation, providing opportunities for conversations and meetings that can occur naturally without attracting the attention that would come with more formal gathering places. People who need to discuss sensitive matters can encounter each other by apparent chance, conduct their business while engaged in an innocent activity, and separate without creating obvious patterns that might be noticed by observers who aren't part of the network of relationships that depend on such discretion. Seasonal flooding brings temporary changes to the landscape that create opportunities for activities that require access to areas that are normally difficult to reach without leaving obvious traces of human presence. During these flood periods, boats can move through areas where walking would leave tracks, and the receding water erases evidence of passage that might otherwise accumulate over time and create patterns that could be noticed by people who aren't supposed to be aware of these activities. The old mill wheel, though no longer functional for its original purpose, serves as a landmark for navigation and timing that helps coordinate activities throughout the river and forest network. Its position at the center of the town's natural transportation system makes it a reference point for people who need to synchronize their movements with others while maintaining the appearance of independent activity. Dr. Matthews has learned to read the subtle signs that indicate when forest medical emergencies might require his attention, situations where conventional emergency services wouldn't be appropriate or available. These medical calls require him to bring supplies and equipment to locations where he can provide care without the support systems that are normally available in his office or the local hospital, treating conditions that arise from activities and circumstances that can't be documented in standard medical records. The trails that connect different areas of the value in standard medical records, forest and river system are maintained by rotating responsibility among community members who understand the importance of preserving access while avoiding the kind of obvious maintenance that would attract unwanted attention from government agencies or curious visitors. This maintenance work is coordinated through informal communication networks that ensure necessary tasks are completed without creating bureaucratic records that might raise questions about land use and management authority. Asterisk. Evening activities in these natural areas take advantage of darkness and sound conditions that provide additional privacy for gatherings and movements that benefit from concealment. The natural acoustics of the forest and river create background noise that masks human conversation, while the darkness provides visual cover that allows people to move between locations without being observed by anyone who might be watching from roads or residential areas. As autumn settles over the landscape and the deciduous trees begin their transformation into the brilliant colors that make this region famous for its natural beauty, the forest and river system prepares for winter patterns of use that will be different from summer activities, but equally important to the community's ability to manage its complex internal relationships and external obligations. The changing seasons bring new opportunities and new challenges, but the natural environment continues to provide the space and privacy that allow Millbrook to function as a community that protects its members while adapting to circumstances that require flexibility, discretion, and the kind of mutual support that can only develop over generations of shared experience and carefully maintained trust. Eleanor Hartwell moves through her daily routines with the careful precision of someone who has learned that small consistencies can provide stability when larger circumstances are beyond personal control. Her morning ritual of tending the roses, watering the garden, and checking the mail creates a rhythm that anchors her to the present while allowing her mind to process memories that span decades of life in Millbrook. The roses that bloom so faithfully each year have roots that extend deep into soil that holds more than nutrients and moisture. Her late husband Robert had been a man of few words, but during their final years together, he had shared enough fragments of his experiences at the mill to help Eleanor understand that their comfortable retirement had been built on his willingness to accept responsibilities that went beyond his official job description. The mill's closure had brought relief as well as economic uncertainty, an end to obligations that had required him to maintain professional relationships with people whose business in Millbrook was never entirely explained to the community at large. The morning joggers who pass Eleanor's fence represent different generations of residents who have found their own ways to accommodate the complexities that define life in this quiet town. Dr. Matthews runs the same route each day, but his pace and timing allow him to observe the subtle changes in the community that might indicate developing situations requiring his professional attention. His medical training helps him notice signs of stress or illness in the people he encounters, while his years of practice in Millbrook have taught him to distinguish between conditions that can be treated with conventional medicine and problems that require different kinds of intervention. Sarah Chun approaches her morning exercise with the systematic attention to detail that she brings to her work at the library, noting changes in the neighborhood that might reflect broader patterns in the community's social dynamics. Her position as a relative newcomer gives her a different perspective on activities and relationships that longtime residents might take for granted, while her research into local history provides context for understanding how current situations connect to events that occurred before her arrival in Millbrook. The postal worker who delivers mail throughout the residential neighborhoods carries more than letters and packages in his daily rounds. Frank Morrison has been serving this route for 15 years, long enough to understand the unspoken protocols that govern his interactions with residents who receive correspondence that doesn't follow normal patterns. Some houses receive mail addressed to people who don't officially live there, while others get packages that are picked up by individuals who aren't family members, but who clearly have permission to collect these deliveries. Mrs. Patterson's grocery store serves as an informal communication center where information flows through carefully orchestrated conversations that appear casual but actually serve to coordinate activities and share updates about developing situations that affect multiple families. Her position behind the counter gives her opportunities to observe who is purchasing unusual quantities of supplies, who is buying items that don't match their normal shopping patterns, and who is paying cash for transactions that would normally be handled with credit cards or checks. The children who walk to school each morning past the empty Whitmore house represent a generation that is growing up with an intuitive understanding that some subjects are not discussed openly, that certain kinds of questions are not encouraged, and that community loyalty sometimes requires accepting limitations on curiosity about topics that adults prefer to handle privately. They learn these lessons through observation and social cues rather than explicit instruction, developing the kind of discretion that allows communities like Millbrook to maintain their internal stability across generational transitions. Grace Kim's role at the antique shop requires her to interact with people during some of the most emotionally difficult periods of their lives, times when family transitions, financial pressures, or changing circumstances force them to make decisions about possessions that carry deep personal significance. Her ability to handle these transactions with sensitivity and discretion makes her a trusted figure for families who need to liquidate assets quickly or quietly, circumstances that arise periodically in a community where people sometimes need to change their situations without attracting unwanted attention. The teenagers who work part-time jobs throughout the town during summer months and school holidays serve functions that go beyond simple employment, providing an informal network of communication and observation that helps adults monitor activities and relationships that require subtle supervision. These young workers move between different businesses and organizations, carrying information and performing tasks that allow for coordination without the kind of formal communication that might create records or attract notice from outside authorities. Thomas, maintaining the cemetery grounds, interacts with families during their most vulnerable moments, providing comfort and practical assistance during funeral arrangements that sometimes involve complicated circumstances. His understanding of grief and loss extends beyond the emotional aspects of bereavement to include the practical challenges that arise when deaths occur under conditions that require careful handling of legal and social complications. The elderly residents who gather at the diner each morning represent a living archive of institutional memory that spans multiple decades of community adaptation to changing external pressures and internal challenges. Their conversations serve educational functions for younger community members who need to understand how current practices developed and why certain protocols exist to protect relationships and arrangements that might not be obvious to people who haven't lived through the experiences that created them. Local business owners throughout Millbrook have developed professional relationships that extend beyond normal commercial cooperation, creating networks of mutual support that allow them to assist each other during times when individual enterprises face pressures that could affect their ability to serve community needs. These relationships involve sharing resources, coordinating schedules, and providing backup services that ensure essential functions continue even when particular businesses or individuals are temporarily unable to meet their normal obligations. The volunteer organizations that coordinate community events and provide social services operate with funding and support systems that include resources from sources that aren't always fully identified in public acknowledgments or official reports. These additional resources allow the organizations to provide assistance and services that go beyond what would be possible through conventional fundraising and government support, creating safety nets for community members who face challenges that can't be addressed through standard social service programs. Family relationships throughout the town reflect the complex balance between personal autonomy and collective responsibility that defines social life in communities where individual decisions can have significant impacts on group welfare. Parents, children, and extended family members navigate these relationships with an understanding that their personal choices affect not just their immediate households, but the broader network of connections that provide security and support for everyone involved. Professional relationships between Millbrook, residents and service providers in neighboring communities create opportunities for accessing resources and services that aren't available locally while maintaining the kind of discretion that protects the community's internal affairs from external scrutiny. These relationships require careful management to ensure that outside contacts don't inadvertently gain access to information that could compromise the privacy and security that allow Millbrook to function according to its own internal logic and values. Asterisk, the seasonal workers who arrive for temporary employment during busy periods at local businesses and farms bring fresh perspectives to the community while also creating opportunities for residents to evaluate external conditions and trends that might affect future planning and decision-making. These temporary residents provide connections to broader economic and social networks while respecting the boundaries that protect Millbrook's internal stability and autonomy. Evening activities throughout the town create opportunities for informal coordination and communication that complement the more structured interactions that occur during business hours and formal community events. These evening gatherings, whether social visits, hobby groups, or casual encounters during walks and errands, allow for the kind of relationship maintenance and information sharing that keeps the community functioning smoothly without requiring formal meetings or official communication channels. As winter approaches and the pace of outdoor activity slows to match the natural rhythms of the season, the people of Millbrook settle into patterns of mutual care and support that have evolved over generations of shared experience with the challenges and opportunities that define life in a community where individual welfare and collective security are understood to be inseparable aspects of a successful and sustainable way of life. Asterisk, the filing system that Sarah Chun has developed for organizing the library's historical collection reflects her growing understanding of how information in Millbrook connects across time periods and family lines and patterns that aren't immediately obvious to casual researchers. What began as a straightforward effort to catalog local documents has evolved into a complex mapping exercise that reveals relationships between people, properties, and events that span multiple decades and involve far more interconnections than would be expected in a community of this size. The Carmichael family's departure from Millbrook in 1952 created a chain of property transfers and relationship changes that affected not only the families who purchased their house and business interests, but also the broader network of financial and social arrangements that had been built around their presence in the community. The documents that Sarah has found suggest that the Carmichaels had served as intermediaries for various transactions that required the kind of discretion and reliability that could only come from people who were deeply embedded in local social networks while maintaining connections to external resources and opportunities. Margaret Sullivan's family history illustrates how individual households adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining their essential role in community structures that depend on continuity and stability. The Sullivan women have passed down not only recipes and household traditions, but also an understanding of how to balance personal needs with collective responsibilities, how to provide support during difficult times while respecting boundaries that protect everyone involved from unnecessary risk or exposure. Dr. Matthews' medical files contain information that reveals the complex ways that physical health reflects social and emotional stresses that arise from living in a community where people sometimes carry responsibilities that go beyond their public roles and acknowledged obligations. The patterns of stress-related illness, sleep disorders, and chronic pain that appear in his records reflect the psychological burden of maintaining the kind of collective discretion that allows communities like Millbrook to function according to their own internal logic while adapting to external pressures and expectations. The Murphy Farm's transformation over the decades from a traditional agricultural operation to a more complex enterprise reflects the family's gradual integration into economic relationships that extend far beyond local markets and seasonal crop production. Timothy Murphy's father had established connections with buyers and suppliers, whose business brought them to Millbrook for reasons that weren't entirely related to farming. Relationships that provided financial stability during periods when conventional agriculture alone wouldn't have been sufficient to maintain the family's property and way of life. Grace Kim's antique business serves functions that extend beyond simple commerce, providing a mechanism for managing the flow of material objects that carry historical and emotional significance for families who need to balance preservation of important memories with practical necessities that arise when circumstances change. Her inventory includes items that tell stories about Millbrook's past, but her role in the community involves helping people navigate the complex decisions about which stories can be safely preserved and shared, and which elements of the past are better left undisturbed. The mill's closure represented not just an economic transition but a fundamental change in the organizational structure that had provided coordination and communication systems for activities that extended well beyond industrial production. The relationships and protocols that had developed around the mill's operations needed to be transferred to other institutions and arrangements, a process that required careful planning and gradual implementation to ensure that essential functions continued while avoiding disruption that might attract unwanted attention from external authorities or observers. Anna Whitmore's experiences during her final years in Millbrook illustrate the challenges that arise when young people develop awareness of adult complexities before they have the emotional maturity and social understanding necessary to process these realities constructively. Her family's departure from the community reflected not only their own inability to continue participating in local arrangements, but also the recognition that Anna's developing knowledge of sensitive information created risks that could affect other families and relationships throughout the town. The cemetery records that Thomas maintains reveal how the community has adapted burial and memorial practices to accommodate deaths that occur under circumstances requiring special consideration for legal, social, or emotional factors that don't align with conventional funeral and burial procedures. These adapted practices ensure that grieving families receive appropriate support and recognition while protecting the community from complications that might arise if certain deaths received standard public acknowledgement and documentation. Eleanor Hartwell's garden serves as more than a personal hobby or aesthetic enhancement to her property, functioning as a subtle communication system that provides information about her household's status and availability for people who understand how to read the signals that are embedded in her gardening choices and maintenance patterns. The roses that bloom so faithfully each year represent not only her dedication to preserving her late husband's memory, but also her continued commitment to maintaining her role in networks of mutual support and communication that connect households throughout the neighborhood. The diner conversations that occur each morning among the elderly residents serve educational and coordination functions that help maintain institutional memory while adapting traditional practices to contemporary circumstances. These conversations allow for the transmission of knowledge and values across generational lines while providing opportunities for ongoing assessment of changing conditions that might require modifications to established procedures and protocols. Local business relationships throughout Millbrook reflect the complex balance between competitive commercial interests and cooperative community needs that requires business owners to coordinate their activities in ways that ensure essential services remain available while avoiding conflicts that might disrupt the social harmony that everyone depends on for their individual success and security. These relationships involve sharing resources, coordinating schedules, and providing mutual support during times when individual businesses face challenges that could affect their ability to serve. Community needs. The volunteer organizations that provide social services and coordinate community events operate according to principles that balance public accountability with the kind of discretion that allows them to assist community members whose needs might not be appropriate for conventional social service programs or government assistance. These organizations have developed funding and support systems that include resources from sources that prefer to remain anonymous, allowing for the provision of assistance that goes beyond what would be possible through traditional charitable and social service channels. Professional relationships between Millbrook residents and service providers in neighboring communities create opportunities for accessing specialized resources and expertise while maintaining the privacy and autonomy that protect the community's internal affairs from external interference or oversight. These relationships require ongoing cultivation and careful management to ensure that outside contacts understand and respect the boundaries that allow Millbrook to function according to its own values and priorities. Family structures throughout the town reflect adaptations that allow for the kind of flexibility and mutual support that enables individuals to fulfill their personal obligations while contributing to collective activities and responsibilities that benefit the entire community. These family arrangements involve extended networks of kinship and chosen affiliation that provide multiple layers of security and support while distributing risks and obligations in ways that prevent any single household from bearing burdens that would be unsustainable over time. The seasonal rhythms that govern community life in Millbrook provide opportunities for different kinds of activities and relationships during different times of the year, allowing for the coordination of functions that require various levels of privacy, security, and community participation. These seasonal patterns help maintain balance between periods of intensive cooperation and times when people can focus on individual and family needs without neglecting their responsibilities to the broader community. As the threads that connect families, businesses, and institutions throughout Millbrook continue to evolve in response to changing circumstances and new challenges, the community maintains its essential character by preserving the values and practices that have allowed multiple generations to build lives that balance individual autonomy with collective security, personal fulfillment with community responsibility, and adaptation to change with preservation of the traditions and relationships that provide stability and meaning in an uncertain world. The decisions that shaped Millbrook's development into its current form arose not from dramatic moments of choice, but from the gradual accumulation of small adaptations to circumstances that required residents to balance competing loyalties and conflicting responsibilities. Understanding these motives requires recognizing that people faced with impossible choices often find ways to create possibilities that exist in the spaces between official rules and unofficial necessities. developing solutions that preserve what matters most while accepting compromises that allow for survival and continuity. James Whitmore's position at the mill during the transitional period of the late 1970s placed him at the center of decisions that would affect not only his own family's future, but the economic survival of the entire community. The choice between exposing illegal activities that could destroy jobs and livelihoods, or participating in arrangements that violated his personal moral compass, represented the kind of ethical dilemma that doesn't offer clear right answers. His eventual decision to protect his family by removing them from Millbrook reflected not cowardice, but a recognition that sometimes the most responsible choice is to withdraw from situations where continued participation would require compromising values that are essential to personal integrity. Dr. Matthews' adaptation to providing medical care under unconventional circumstances illustrates how professional ethical obligations can be honored even when the context doesn't conform to standard procedures and protocols. His decision to treat patients without complete medical histories or insurance documentation reflected his understanding that medical ethics require providing care to people who need it, regardless of the legal or financial complications that might arise from their circumstances. The discomfort he felt about not following normal procedures was balanced by his recognition that normal procedures weren't designed to address the kinds of emergencies and health crises that occur when people are living in situations that exist outside conventional social and legal frameworks. The Murphy family's gradual transition from traditional farming to more complex economic arrangements reflected their understanding that preserving their land and way of life required adapting to opportunities that weren't entirely comfortable, but were necessary for financial survival. Timothy's father had faced the choice between losing the farm that had been in the family for generations or accepting partnerships with people whose business activities weren't entirely transparent, but who offered reliable income and long-term security. The decision to provide land and services for activities that required discretion allowed the family to maintain their agricultural operations while contributing to community arrangements that provided benefits for many people beyond their immediate household. Margaret Sullivan's mother had faced similar choices during her years as a young wife and mother, times when supporting her family's economic security required accepting social arrangements that she didn't fully understand but recognized as necessary for maintaining the community stability that protected everyone's children and futures. Her decision to focus on being a good neighbor and reliable community member, while avoiding questions about activities that didn't directly concern her family, reflected a practical wisdom that prioritized long-term relationship maintenance over short-term curiosity satisfaction. Grace, Kim's decision to establish her antique business in Millbrook reflected her understanding that small communities often need people who can provide specialized services while maintaining the kind of discretion that allows for privacy and flexibility in personal and family affairs. Her background in urban environments had given her experience with the kinds of complex social and economic relationships that require careful boundary management, skills that translated well to the particular needs of a community where people sometimes need to liquidate assets quickly or quietly without attracting unwanted attention or questions. Mrs. Patterson's choice to continue operating the grocery store after her husband's death reflected not only economic necessity, but her recognition that the store served functions that went beyond simple commerce, providing a communication center and resource hub that the community depended on for coordination and mutual support. Her decision to maintain the traditions and relationships that her husband had established meant accepting responsibilities that included keeping confidences, managing information flow, and providing services that weren't necessarily profitable but were essential for community welfare. Thomas's decision to take the position as cemetery groundskeeper reflected his understanding that communities need people who can handle the emotional and practical challenges that arise when deaths occur under circumstances that require special sensitivity and discretion. His background in military service had given him experience with loss and grief that prepared him to provide comfort and support to families while managing burial and memorial practices that don't conform to standard procedures but serve important functions for people whose circumstances require adaptation of traditional practices. Eleanor Hartwell's choice to remain in Millbrook after her husband's death reflected her understanding that communities depend on institutional memory and continuity that can only be provided by people who have lived through multiple generations of change and adaptation. Her decision to maintain her property and participate in community activities, despite the loneliness that comes with widowhood, represents a commitment to preserving relationships and knowledge that benefit people beyond her immediate family, contributions that help maintain the social fabric that supports everyone in the community. Sarah Chun's decision to move to Millbrook and dedicate herself to organizing and preserving local historical materials reflected her recognition that small communities often struggle to maintain adequate records and documentation of their own development and change. Her research and organizational work serves current residents who need access to historical information for legal and practical purposes, while also preserving materials that will be important for future generations who want to understand how their community evolved and adapted to various challenges and opportunities. The anonymous donors who provide funding for community organizations and services represent people who have benefited from community arrangements and want to ensure that essential functions continue to be available for other residents who face similar challenges and needs. Their decision to provide financial support without seeking recognition or control reflects an understanding that sustainable community support systems require resources that go beyond what can be generated through conventional fundraising, government assistance, while maintaining the autonomy and flexibility that allow local organizations to respond effectively to changing circumstances and emerging needs. The families who chose to remain in Millbrook, despite opportunities to relocate to places where their children might have access to better educational and economic opportunities, made these decisions based on their understanding that some values and relationships can't be replicated in other environments. Their commitment to maintaining community continuity reflects recognition that certain kinds of security and support are only available in places where multiple generations have invested in building trust and mutual obligation, where people know and care about each other in ways that create resilience and strength that can't be purchased or easily transferred to new locations. The younger residents who have chosen to raise families in Millbrook, despite awareness that the community involves complexities and compromises that they don't fully understand, represent a continuing commitment to the values and relationships that make this place worth preserving. Their decision to trust older generations to manage aspects of community life that require specialized knowledge and experience reflects an understanding that successful communities depend on division of labor and shared responsibility that allows different people to contribute according to their abilities and circumstances, while participating in collective benefits that emerge from cooperative effort and mutual support. The motives that drive these individual and family decisions reflect a shared understanding that perfect solutions are rarely available in real-world circumstances, that ethical choices often involve selecting the least harmful option among alternatives that all involve some degree of compromise, and that preserving what matters most sometimes requires accepting situations that are imperfect but workable. The people of Millbrook have learned to make these choices with wisdom, compassion, and commitment to values that prioritize long-term community welfare over short-term individual advantage, creating a way of life that provides security and meaning even in the face of circumstances that require ongoing adaptation and careful management. Volume 9, Gentle Revelations. Understanding that gradually emerges about Millbrook's true nature comes not through dramatic discoveries, but through the slow recognition of patterns that have always been visible to those who knew how to see them. Like morning mist that lifts gradually from the river, to reveal a landscape that was always there but temporarily obscured. The full picture of how this community functions becomes clear through patience and careful observation rather than sudden revelation or shocking disclosure. Sarah Chune's research into local history eventually reveals that Millbrook has served for decades as a sanctuary community, a place where people who needed to disappear from their previous lives could find safety and new identities while contributing to a community that understood the value of discretion and mutual protection. The mill's transition in the late 1970s represented not just an economic change, but the formal organization of informal arrangements that had existed since the town's founding, when the original settlers included people who had reasons for seeking remote locations where they could build new lives without interference from authorities or enemies who might be searching for them. Dr. Matthews comes to understand that his medical practice serves not only the official residents of Millbrook, but also a rotating population of people who stay temporarily while transitioning between phases of their lives. Individuals who require medical care while they recover from trauma, adapt to new circumstances, or prepare for the next stage of journeys that may take them far from this quiet valley. His willingness to provide care without asking uncomfortable questions makes him an essential part of a network that extends far beyond Millbrook's geographical boundaries, connecting this small community to a broader system of mutual aid and protection that operates beneath the surface of conventional society. Murphy Farm's evolution into its current form reflects Timothy's family's long-standing role as providers of temporary housing and work opportunities for people who need time and space to heal, plan, or simply rest during difficult transitions. The agricultural work provides legitimate employment that doesn't require extensive documentation or background checks, while the farm's isolation and community connections create an environment where people can recover their strength and confidence while deciding what they want to do with the rest of their lives. Margaret Sullivan's understanding of her family's place in Millbrook's social fabric deepens as she recognizes that her mother and grandmother's commitment to neighborly support and discretion reflected their participation in traditions that go back to the community's founding. The Sullivan women have always served as informal counselors and coordinators, people who help newcomers understand how the community works while providing emotional support and practical assistance to established residents who face personal crises that can't be resolved through conventional social services or professional help. Grace Kim's antique business functions as more than a commercial enterprise, serving as a discrete banking and transfer system that allows people to convert assets from their previous lives into resources they can use in their new circumstances. The items that people sell often represent their entire portable wealth, possessions that must be liquidated carefully to avoid attracting attention while providing funds needed for new starts in new places. Grace's role involves evaluating not only the monetary value of these items, but their emotional significance to sellers who are often parting with the last tangible connections to identities they can no longer maintain. Mrs. Patterson's grocery store serves as a communication hub that connects Millbrook to the broader network of sanctuary communities, places where messages can be left, packages can be received, and information can be shared among people who are working to help others escape dangerous situations or build new lives in safer environments. Her position behind the counter gives her opportunities to observe and coordinate activities while maintaining the kind of plausible deniability that protects everyone involved from legal complications that might arise if their assistance were scrutinized by authorities who don't understand or approve of these informal support systems. Thomas's work at the cemetery includes maintaining memorial sites for people whose deaths occurred under circumstances that required special handling, individuals whose families needed to grieve and remember while protecting themselves and others from retaliation or legal consequences that might arise if these deaths received conventional public acknowledgement. The cemetery also serves as a communication location where people can leave messages and signals for others who need to maintain contact while avoiding direct meetings that might be observed or documented. Asterisk. Eleanor Hartwell's garden provides a subtle communication system that helps coordinate the community's activities and provides information about the status of various operations and the availability of resources and services. The careful maintenance of her roses and the timing of her gardening activities create signals that can be read by people who understand the code, while appearing to casual observers as nothing more than the hobby of an elderly woman who takes pride in her property's appearance. Diner conversations among elderly residents serve educational functions that help maintain the institutional knowledge necessary for the community's continued operation, ensuring that essential information about procedures, relationships, and resources is passed down to younger generations who will eventually take over responsibilities for managing Millbrook's role in the broader network of sanctuary communities. These conversations also provide opportunities for ongoing assessment of changing conditions and emerging threats that might require modifications to established practices and protocols. Anna Whitmore's experiences during her family's final years in Millbrook illustrate both the benefits and the challenges of growing up in a sanctuary community where children develop an early understanding of the importance of discretion and loyalty, while also struggling with the moral complexities that arise when community survival requires accepting situations that don't align with simple ethical frameworks. Her family's departure reflected their recognition that Anna's developing awareness of adult secrets created risks for other families and relationships throughout the town, demonstrating the kind of difficult choices that sometimes become necessary to protect the greater good. Asterisk. The seasonal rhythms that govern community life in Millbrook provide opportunities for different kinds of sanctuary activities throughout the year, with summer bringing people who need temporary work and housing while they recover from immediate crises, and winter providing longer-term shelter for individuals who require extended time to plan and prepare for permanent relocation to new communities and new lives. The revelation that Millbrook functions as a sanctuary community explains many of the apparent mysteries and contradictions that have puzzled observers over the years, but it also raises new questions about how such communities emerge and sustain themselves, how they balance the needs of temporary residents with the security and stability required by permanent community members, and how they maintain the social and economic resources necessary to continue providing these essential services. Asterisk. The people who have built and maintained Millbrook's sanctuary functions represent a remarkable commitment to values that prioritize human welfare over legal technicalities, community security over individual advantage, and long-term sustainability over short-term convenience. Their success in creating a functional model of mutual aid and protection demonstrates that alternative approaches to social organization are possible when people are willing to accept the responsibilities and compromises that such alternatives require. Understanding Millbrook's true nature reveals that the community's apparent ordinariness is actually its greatest strength, providing the kind of camouflage that allows extraordinary work to continue without attracting unwanted attention from authorities or enemies who might seek to disrupt operations that provide safety and hope to people who have nowhere else to turn for help. The morning mist that rises from the river carries with it the accumulated memories of all the people who have found refuge in Millbrook's gentle embrace, stories of transformation and healing that have unfolded quietly over decades of careful nurturing and patient support. As autumn settles over the valley and prepares to yield to winter's peaceful rest, the town continues its essential work with the steady confidence that comes from generations of successful adaptation to the complex demands of providing sanctuary, while maintaining the security and stability that protects everyone who calls this place home. Sarah Chun has found her place within Millbrook's intricate social fabric, Understanding now that her role as librarian and historical researcher serves functions that extend far beyond simple information management and preservation. Her work, documenting the community's official history, provides essential cover for activities that require careful coordination and communication, while her position as a relative newcomer allows her to serve as a bridge between long-established residents and the rotating population of temporary community members who benefit from having someone who understands what it feels like to adapt to new circumstances and build new relationships. Dr. Matthews has developed a medical practice that serves as a model for healthcare delivery in communities where conventional approaches to patient documentation and insurance procedures don't adequately address the realities of providing care to people whose circumstances require flexibility and discretion. His success in maintaining professional standards while adapting to unconventional situations demonstrates that ethical medical practice can be preserved even when the context doesn't conform to standard regulatory expectations, creating possibilities for healing and support that wouldn't be available through conventional healthcare systems. The Murphy Farm has evolved into a comprehensive resource for people who need not only temporary housing and employment, but also practical education and skills that will serve them well when they establish new lives in new communities. Timothy's quiet wisdom and practical knowledge provide guidance that helps people develop the confidence and capabilities they need to succeed in whatever circumstances they choose for their futures, while the agricultural work creates a peaceful environment for reflection and planning that allows for thoughtful decision-making about complex life transitions. Margaret Sullivan has embraced her inheritance of family traditions that connect her to generations of women who have provided essential support and guidance to community members facing difficult transitions and challenging circumstances. Understanding of how to balance compassion with discretion, how to provide practical assistance without creating unwanted dependencies, and how to maintain the kind of relationships that sustain communities through changing times represents wisdom that has been refined over decades of successful community building and mutual support. Grace Kim's antique business has become a sophisticated resource management system that serves the economic needs of both temporary and permanent community members while preserving material culture that tells the story of Millbrook's development and adaptation over time. Her ability to evaluate the significance and potential of objects that represent people's connections to their past lives provides essential services for individuals who must make difficult decisions about what to preserve and what to release as they build new identities and new relationships. Mrs. Patterson has developed the grocery store into a communication and coordination center that serves the practical needs of community operations while maintaining the appearance of ordinary small-town commerce that provides essential camouflage for activities that require protection from unwanted scrutiny. Her position at the center of daily community life gives her opportunities to monitor developing situations and coordinate responses that ensure problems are addressed before they become crises that might threaten the community's ability to continue its essential work. Thomas has created memorial and burial practices that honor the lives and deaths of people whose circumstances require special consideration, while providing grieving families and friends with opportunities for healing and remembrance that respect both their emotional needs and the practical requirements of maintaining community security. His understanding of how to balance commemoration with discretion ensures that important lives are properly honored while protecting the living from consequences that might arise from unwanted attention or investigation. Eleanor Hartwell has become a living symbol of the continuity and stability that allow communities like Millbrook to maintain their essential character across generations of change and adaptation. Her dedication to preserving her home and garden, her commitment to maintaining relationships and traditions that connect past and present, and her willingness to share wisdom and support with younger community members represent the kind of institutional memory and cultural preservation that provides foundations for ongoing community development and resilience. The seasonal patterns that govern life in Millbrook have evolved to accommodate the rhythms of sanctuary work while maintaining the agricultural and social traditions that provide legitimacy and sustainability for the community's operations. Spring brings new arrivals who need immediate shelter and support. Summer provides opportunities for temporary work and relationship building. Autumn offers time for reflection and planning. And winter creates the kind of intimate community atmosphere that allows for deep healing and the development of lasting connections that will support people throughout their journeys toward new lives and new possibilities. The children who are growing up in Millbrook today represent a new generation that will inherit responsibility for maintaining and adapting the community's sanctuary functions while facing challenges and opportunities that may be very different from those encountered by previous generations. Their education includes not only conventional academic subjects, but also the development of emotional intelligence, ethical reasoning, and practical skills that will prepare them to make thoughtful decisions about how to balance individual desires with community responsibilities, how to preserve essential traditions while adapting to changing circumstances, and how to maintain the values and relationships that make Millbrook a place where people can find safety, healing, and hope. The network of connections that links Millbrook to other sanctuary communities creates a system of mutual support and resource sharing that extends far beyond the geographical boundaries of this single town, demonstrating that alternative approaches to social organization can be sustained when they are based on principles of cooperation, mutual aid, and shared commitment to human welfare. These connections provide opportunities for people to move between communities as their needs and circumstances change, ensuring that the sanctuary system can continue to evolve and adapt while maintaining its essential functions and values. The success of Millbrook sanctuary operations reflects the dedication and wisdom of multiple generations of residents who have chosen to dedicate their lives to creating and maintaining a community that prioritizes human welfare over legal technicalities, that values discretion and loyalty over publicity and recognition, and that understands that true security comes not from isolation or defensiveness, but from building relationships and systems that provide genuine support and protection for people who need help during the most difficult and vulnerable periods of their lives. The peace that settles over Millbrook each evening as families gather for dinner, children complete homework assignments, and elderly residents settle into comfortable routines reflects not just the absence of conflict, but the presence of deep satisfaction that comes from participating in meaningful work that makes a real difference in people's lives. The community has learned to find joy and fulfillment in activities that may never receive public recognition or official acknowledgement, understanding that the most important contributions to human welfare often occur quietly, without fanfare or celebration, through the accumulated impact of countless small acts of kindness, support, and protection. Asterisk, the river continues its patient journey through the valley, carrying away the sediment of old concerns while bringing fresh water that nourishes new growth and new possibilities. The mill wheel stands as a reminder of the community's ability to adapt its functions while preserving its essential character, demonstrating that change and continuity can coexist when guided by wisdom, patience, and commitment to values that transcend immediate circumstances and temporary challenges. The mist that rises each morning from the river's surface carries with it the hopes and dreams of all the people who have found healing in this place, aspirations that extend far beyond Millbrook's boundaries to encompass visions of a world where communities everywhere can provide the kind of sanctuary and support that allows every person to recover from trauma, escape from danger, and build lives that reflect their deepest values and highest aspirations. As winter approaches and the community prepares for another season of quiet work and mutual care, the people of Millbrook carry forward traditions that connect them to the past while adapting to present needs and preparing for future challenges that will require the same qualities of wisdom, courage, and compassion that have sustained this sanctuary community through decades of successful service to people who had nowhere else to turn for help. The lights that appear in windows throughout the town as evening settles over the valley represent not just individual households, but a network of connection and commitment that extends beyond family boundaries to encompass the entire community, and beyond the community to include all the people whose lives have been touched by Millbrook's gentle ministry of healing and hope. These lights shine as beacons for travelers who are still searching for safety, signals of welcome for people who need refuge, and symbols of the enduring human capacity to create places where love and justice can flourish, even in a world that often seems dominated by fear and violence. The stories that have unfolded in Millbrook over the decades represent just one example of what becomes possible when people choose to organize their lives around principles of mutual aid and collective responsibility, demonstrating that alternative approaches to community building and social organization can succeed when they are based on realistic understanding of human needs and genuine commitment to human welfare. The quiet success of this sanctuary community offers hope that other places can develop similar approaches to providing safety and support for people who need help, creating a network of refuge that can grow and strengthen over time as more communities discover the satisfaction and meaning that come from dedicating themselves to this essential work. As you settle into sleep tonight, perhaps in your own home surrounded by the comfort and security that come from being part of a community that cares about your welfare, remember that there are places like Millbrook where people have chosen to dedicate their lives to ensuring that everyone has access to safety, healing, and hope. These communities exist quietly, working without fanfare or recognition, providing essential services that make it possible for people to survive difficult circumstances and build new lives that reflect their deepest values and highest aspirations. The peace that settles over Millbrook each night settles also over countless other places where people are working to create sanctuary, to provide healing, and to offer hope to those who need it most. These places exist because people like you believe that every human life has value, that everyone deserves access to safety and support, and that communities can choose to organize themselves around principles of love and justice rather than fear and competition. Rest now in the knowledge that there are people throughout the world who are working to ensure that no one has to face their darkest moments alone, that communities like Millbrook continue their quiet ministry of healing and hope, and that the values that sustain these sanctuary communities represent possibilities that exist for any group of people who choose to commit themselves to creating places where everyone can find safety, healing, and the support they need to build lives of meaning, purpose, and joy. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the gentle mysteries of Millbrook, for allowing these stories to accompany you as you prepare for rest, and for carrying with you the understanding that peace and safety are not accidents but achievements that require the ongoing commitment cooperation of people who believe that creating sanctuary is among the most important work that human beings can do together. Sleep well, and may your dreams be filled with the same peaceful confidence that settles each night over the river valley where Millbrook continues its patient work of healing and hope. Spring returns to Millbrook with the gentle insistence of renewal that marks another cycle in the community's ongoing rhythm of sanctuary and healing. The river runs higher with snowmelt from the distant mountains, carrying away the accumulated debris of winter while bringing fresh nutrients that will nourish the valley's abundant growth in the months ahead. Sarah Chun opens the library windows for the first time since autumn, allowing the sweet air of awakening earth to flow through rooms that have held the concentrated warmth of human stories throughout the quiet months of winter reflection. The morning joggers emerge from their indoor routines to reclaim the sidewalks and trails that connect the residential neighborhoods to the natural areas where the community's deeper work unfolds according to seasonal rhythms that have been refined over generations of careful practice. Dr. Matthews notices the improvement in his patient's energy and mood that comes with longer days and the return of outdoor activities, changes that reflect not just the biological responses to increased sunlight, but also the psychological lift That comes from knowing that another year of successful sanctuary operations has been completed without major incidents or compromises to community security. Eleanor Hartwell begins her spring garden preparation with the satisfaction of someone who has watched this cycle repeat for decades, each year bringing new arrivals who need the kind of healing that can only come from participating in the simple, life-affirming work of planting seeds and nurturing growth. Her roses have survived another winter, their roots extending deeper into soil that has been enriched by the careful composting of organic materials that tell their own stories of transformation and renewal. The Murphy farm awakens from winter dormancy with plans for crops that will provide both legitimate agricultural income and opportunities for meaningful work for people who need time and structure, while they recover from trauma and prepare for whatever comes next in their journeys toward new lives and new possibilities. Timothy has developed planting schedules that accommodate the varying lengths of stay that different people require, ensuring that everyone who works on the farm can see projects through to completion while learning skills that will serve them well in whatever circumstances they choose for their futures. Grace Kim prepares for the annual influx of estate sales and family transitions that spring seems to bring. Situations where people make decisions about preserving or releasing material connections to past lives that are ending or transforming in ways that require careful handling of both practical and emotional complexities. Her inventory management has evolved to anticipate these seasonal patterns, ensuring that she has adequate space and resources to handle the increase in items that people need to convert from symbols of old identities into resources for new beginnings. Mrs. Patterson restocks her grocery store with supplies that reflect the changing needs of a community that will soon welcome new temporary residents while supporting established community members through another season of intensive sanctuary work. Her ordering patterns have been refined over years of experience with the rhythms of refuge and healing, ensuring that essential supplies are always available while maintaining the careful balance between preparedness and the kind of ordinary appearance that protects the community's operations from unwanted scrutiny. Asterisk. The cemetery awakens from winter's dormancy as Thomas begins the spring maintenance that prepares memorial sites for another season of grief, remembrance, and healing. The flowers that community members plant on graves represent not just personal mourning but collective commitment to honoring lives that were lived and lost under circumstances that required special understanding and care. These spring plantings create beauty that serves both aesthetic and practical functions, providing visual symbols of continuity and renewal while creating opportunities for the kind of casual encounters that allow for communication and coordination without formal meetings or obvious planning. Anna Whitmore, now an adult living in a distant city, sometimes thinks of Millbrook during spring mornings when the air carries the scent of blooming fruit trees and fresh earth. Her memories of growing up in the sanctuary community have evolved over the years from confusion and resentment to understanding and appreciation for the complex moral courage that her neighbors displayed in their daily commitment to protecting people who had nowhere else to turn for help. The letters she occasionally receives from Margaret Sullivan keep her connected to the community that shaped her understanding of what it means to take responsibility for other people's welfare, even when doing so requires personal sacrifice and moral complexity. The trails that wind through the forest and along the river show signs of increased activity as community members resume outdoor meetings and coordination activities that benefit from the privacy and natural beauty of settings that have been carefully maintained to provide sanctuary for both human and wildlife populations. The returning birds and emerging wildflowers create a symphony of renewal that accompanies conversations about plans and preparations for another season of sanctuary work. The diner conversations among elderly residents turn to practical matters of resource allocation and schedule coordination as the community prepares to welcome new arrivals who will need housing, employment, medical care, and the kind of emotional Support that helps people heal from trauma while building confidence for whatever decisions they make about their futures. These conversations reflect decades of experience with the complex logistics of sanctuary operations, wisdom that has been accumulated through years of trial and refinement of practices that balance efficiency with compassion, security with accessibility. Dr. Matthews reviews his medical supplies and updates his knowledge of treatments for conditions that arise when people have been living under circumstances of extreme stress, violence, or deprivation. His spring preparation includes not just inventory management, but also psychological preparation for the emotional demands of providing care to people whose physical symptoms often reflect deeper traumas that require patient, gentle approaches to healing that address both immediate medical needs and longer-term recovery from experiences that may have fundamentally changed their relationship to trust, safety, and hope. The volunteer organizations that coordinate community events and provide social services begin planning activities that will integrate new arrivals into the social fabric of Millbrook while maintaining the careful boundaries that protect everyone involved from complications that might arise if sanctuary operations became too visible or attracted unwanted attention from authorities or others who might not understand or approve of the community's approach to mutual aid and protection. Sarah Chen expands her historical research to include documentation of the community's evolution and adaptation over time, creating records that will help future generations understand how sanctuary operations developed and changed in response to different challenges and opportunities. Her work serves both practical and cultural functions, preserving institutional knowledge while creating narratives that help community members understand their place in traditions that extend far beyond their individual involvement. The seasonal rhythms that govern sanctuary work in Millbrook reflect understanding that healing and transformation require time, patience, and the kind of consistent support that can only be provided by communities that are committed to long-term relationship building rather than quick fixes or temporary solutions. Spring represents not just renewal, but also the beginning of another cycle of careful, patient work that will unfold over the coming months as new people arrive seeking sanctuary and established community members continue their dedication to creating and maintaining places where everyone can find safety, healing, and hope. As the morning mist lifts from the river and reveals the familiar landscape of home to the people who have chosen to dedicate their lives to sanctuary work, Millbrook prepares for another season of quiet service to humanity's fundamental need. For communities that prioritize compassion over convenience, healing over judgment, and hope over fear. The spring air carries promises of growth and renewal that extend far beyond the agricultural cycles that provide cover for the community's deeper work, encompassing possibilities for human transformation and social innovation that demonstrate what becomes achievable when people commit themselves to creating alternatives to systems that have failed to protect the most vulnerable members of society. Summer brings not only the familiar rhythms of increased sanctuary activity, but also new connections that extend Millbrook's reach into regions where other communities are developing their own approaches to providing refuge and support for people who need alternatives to conventional social services and protection systems. The network of relationships that has sustained this sanctuary community for decades continues to evolve and expand, creating opportunities for shared learning and mutual support that strengthen the movement toward community-based solutions to problems that government and institutional responses have been unable to address effectively. Dr. Matthews receives a visit from a colleague who has established a similar medical practice in a mountain community 3 states away, a physician who has been providing health care to people whose circumstances require the kind of flexibility and discretion that conventional medical systems cannot accommodate. Their conversation, conducted during long walks along Millbrook's river trails, explores practical and ethical questions about maintaining professional standards while adapting to the realities of serving populations that exist outside normal documentation and insurance frameworks. The Murphy Farm hosts a gathering of agricultural specialists from other sanctuary communities, people who have developed innovative approaches to providing meaningful work and practical education for individuals who need time and structure while they recover from trauma and prepare for new phases of their lives. These agricultural workers share techniques for crop planning, land management, and workforce coordination that maximize both productivity and therapeutic benefits, creating models that can be adapted to different geographical and economic circumstances. Grace Kim participates in a regional conference of resource managers who have developed systems for helping people convert assets from previous lives into resources they can use in new circumstances. These specialists, working in antique shops, pawn shops, and other businesses that deal in used goods and valuable items, have created informal networks that allow for discrete asset liquidation and transfer while maintaining the kind of documentation and legitimacy that protects both buyers and sellers from legal complications that might arise from transactions involving people whose identities and circumstances require special handling. Mrs. Patterson coordinates with grocery store operators and small business owners from other communities to develop supply chains and communication systems that support sanctuary operations while maintaining the appearance of ordinary commercial activity. These business relationships create opportunities for resource sharing and mutual support that extend the capacity of individual communities while distributing risks and responsibilities in ways that provide greater security and sustainability for the entire network. Sarah Chen exchanges historical research and documentation methods with librarians and archivists who are working to preserve the stories and institutional knowledge of other sanctuary communities, ensuring that the wisdom and experience accumulated over decades of sanctuary work is not lost when key individuals retire or relocate. This collaboration creates a distributed archive of sanctuary practices and principles that can guide future communities while preserving the cultural heritage of a movement that has provided safety and hope to countless individuals over many generations. Thomas participates in discussions with groundskeepers and memorial specialists from other communities about practices for honoring lives and deaths that occur under circumstances requiring special sensitivity and discretion. These conversations address both practical and spiritual aspects of burial and commemoration, ensuring that grieving families receive appropriate support while maintaining the security and privacy that protect living community members from potential retaliation or legal consequences. Eleanor Hartwell hosts visits from elderly residents of other sanctuary communities, people who serve similar functions as keepers of institutional memory and cultural continuity. These visits provide opportunities for sharing wisdom about managing the emotional and practical challenges of sanctuary work over the long term, while also creating personal connections that offer mutual support and encouragement for people who have dedicated their lives to this demanding but essential work. The children and teenagers of Millbrook participate in cultural exchange programs with young people from other sanctuary communities, activities that are disguised as summer camps and educational trips, but actually serve to build relationships and share knowledge that will prepare the next generation to assume responsibility for sanctuary operations in their respective communities. These exchanges help young people understand that they are part of a larger movement while developing the skills and values they will need to adapt sanctuary practices to changing circumstances and emerging challenges. The network of sanctuary communities has developed sophisticated communication systems that allow for coordination of resources and services while maintaining the security and discretion that protect all participants from unwanted attention or interference. These communication methods include both high-tech encrypted systems and traditional methods that rely on personal relationships and face-to-face contact, creating redundancy and flexibility that ensure essential information can flow even when particular channels are compromised or disrupted. Regional coordination of sanctuary activities allows for specialized communities that focus on particular populations or types of assistance, creating a system where people can be referred to places that are best equipped to address their specific needs and circumstances. Some communities specialize in providing services for families with children. Others focus on helping people recover from specific types of trauma, and still others concentrate on particular professional or cultural groups that benefit from specialized understanding and support. The expansion of the Sanctuary Network has created opportunities for research and development of new approaches to community organization and social support that demonstrate alternatives to conventional government and institutional responses to human needs. These innovations include new models for healthcare delivery, education, economic development, and conflict resolution that prioritize human welfare over bureaucratic procedures and legal technicalities. Training programs for new sanctuary communities provide guidance and support for groups that want to develop their own refuge operations but need assistance with the complex logistics and relationship management that sanctuary work requires. These programs include both formal educational components and apprenticeship opportunities that allow experienced sanctuary workers to share their knowledge and skills while helping new communities avoid common mistakes and develop practices that are appropriate for their particular circumstances and resources. The success of the expanding sanctuary network has attracted attention from researchers, social workers, and policymakers who are interested in understanding how these communities achieve results that conventional social service systems have been unable to accomplish. This interest creates both opportunities and challenges, as sanctuary communities must balance their commitment to transparency and knowledge sharing with their need to maintain the privacy and security that allow them to continue providing services to people who might be endangered by public exposure or official scrutiny. Documentation of sanctuary practices and outcomes provides evidence that community-based approaches to social problems can achieve remarkable success when they are based on principles of mutual aid, collective responsibility, and long-term relationship building rather than short-term intervention and crisis management. This evidence supports advocacy for policy changes that would create legal frameworks for sanctuary communities while protecting them from interference by authorities who might not understand or approve of their methods and values. The evolution of the sanctuary network represents a quiet revolution in social organization that demonstrates the possibility of creating alternatives to systems that have failed to protect the most vulnerable members of society. These communities show that people can organize themselves around principles of compassion and mutual support to create places where everyone has access to safety, healing, and the opportunity to build lives that reflect their deepest values and highest aspirations. As summer progresses and the network of sanctuary communities continues to expand and strengthen, the people of Millbrook take satisfaction in knowing that their decades of patient work have contributed to a movement that now provides hope and assistance to people throughout a region that spans multiple states and includes communities with diverse approaches to sanctuary work but shared commitment to human welfare and social justice. Autumn arrives in Millbrook with the gentle insistence of change that marks another transition in the community's ongoing evolution from a single sanctuary to a hub and a network of communities that have demonstrated the possibility of organizing society around principles of mutual aid and collective responsibility rather than competition and individual advancement. The changing leaves create a tapestry of color that reflects the diversity and beauty of lives that have been transformed through decades of careful, patient work by people who understood that true security comes not from isolation or defensiveness, but from building relationships and systems that provide genuine support and protection for everyone who needs help. Sarah Chun has been invited to serve as coordinator for a regional archive project that will preserve the stories and institutional knowledge of sanctuary communities throughout the network, ensuring that the wisdom accumulated over generations of sanctuary work will be available to guide future communities while honoring the contributions of people who dedicated their lives to creating alternatives to systems that failed to protect the most vulnerable members of society. Her acceptance of this position represents not just personal advancement, but recognition of Millbrook's leadership role in developing effective approaches to community-based sanctuary and social support. Dr. Matthews receives an appointment to teach at a new medical school that is being established specifically to train healthcare providers for service in sanctuary communities and other alternative social organizations that require medical practitioners who can adapt conventional healthcare practices to unconventional circumstances while maintaining professional standards and ethical principles. His curriculum will include not just medical knowledge, but also training in the interpersonal skills and cultural understanding that allow healthcare providers to serve populations whose circumstances require special sensitivity and discretion. The Murphy Farm has been selected as a demonstration site for sustainable agriculture practices that integrate legitimate farming operations with workforce development programs for people who need meaningful employment while they recover from trauma and prepare for new phases of their lives. Timothy's innovations in crop planning and land management will be documented and shared with other communities that want to develop similar programs, while the farm itself will continue to serve its essential functions in Millbrook's sanctuary operations. Margaret Sullivan has been chosen to lead a training program for women who want to develop the interpersonal skills and cultural knowledge necessary for providing the kind of emotional support and practical guidance that sanctuary communities require. Her curriculum will include conflict resolution, crisis counseling, and resource coordination, but will focus especially on the wisdom and intuition that allow experienced community members to provide assistance that addresses not just immediate, practical needs, but also the deeper emotional and spiritual healing that enables people to rebuild their lives with confidence and hope. Grace Kim expands her antique business into a regional network of resource management specialists who have developed sophisticated systems for helping people transition assets from previous lives into resources they can use in new circumstances. This expansion creates opportunities for people throughout the sanctuary network to access specialized services while providing grace with resources that will allow her to continue serving Millbrook's community while contributing to the broader movement toward community-based solutions to social and economic problems. Mrs. Patterson's grocery store becomes a model for business operations that serves sanctuary functions while maintaining legitimate commercial activities that provide both economic sustainability and protective camouflage for community operations. Her innovations in inventory management, customer service, and communication coordination will be taught to other business owners who want to contribute to sanctuary work while maintaining profitable enterprises that serve conventional customers, alongside their special functions in sanctuary communities. Thomas's approach to cemetery management and memorial services has been recognized as a model for honoring lives and deaths that occur under circumstances requiring special sensitivity and discretion, while providing grieving families with opportunities for healing and remembrance that respect both their emotional needs and the practical requirements of maintaining community security. His methods will be shared with other communities while he continues his essential work in Millbrook's ongoing sanctuary operations. Eleanor Hartwell's role as keeper of institutional memory and cultural continuity has evolved into formal recognition as an elder advisor for the entire sanctuary network, a position that allows her to share the wisdom she has accumulated over decades of sanctuary work while providing guidance and support to communities that are developing their own approaches to preserving cultural heritage and maintaining social cohesion across generations of change and adaptation. The young people who have grown up in Millbrook represent a new generation that combines deep understanding of sanctuary principles and practices with contemporary knowledge and skills that will allow them to adapt these traditions to changing circumstances and emerging challenges. Some will remain in Millbrook to continue the community sanctuary work, while others will establish new communities or serve specialized functions within the expanding network of sanctuary operations. Anna Whitmore returns to Millbrook for the first time since her family's departure decades earlier, bringing her own daughter to visit the community that shaped her understanding of what it means to take responsibility for other people's welfare, even when doing so requires personal sacrifice and moral complexity. Her visit represents not just personal reconciliation, but also recognition of the important role that Millbrook played in her development, and her eventual choice to pursue a career in social work that focuses on helping people escape dangerous situations and build new lives in safer environments. The seasonal patterns that have governed sanctuary work in Millbrook for generations continue to provide structure and rhythm for community operations, but they have also been adapted and refined to accommodate the increased coordination and communication required by participation in a regional network of sanctuary communities. These adaptations demonstrate the flexibility and resilience that allow effective communities to evolve and grow while maintaining their essential character and core values. The success of Millbrook Sanctuary operations has attracted attention from policymakers and social service professionals who are interested in understanding how community-based approaches to social problems achieve results that conventional government and institutional programs have been unable to accomplish. This attention creates opportunities for advocacy and education that could lead to policy changes supporting community-based sanctuary work, but it also requires careful management to maintain the privacy and security that allows sanctuary communities to continue their essential functions. Documentation of sanctuary practices and outcomes provides evidence that alternative approaches to social organization can create remarkable improvements in individual lives and community welfare when they are based on principles of mutual aid, collective responsibility, and long-term relationship building rather than short-term intervention and bureaucratic procedures. This evidence supports the development of new theoretical frameworks for understanding community development and social change that recognize the importance of culture, relationships, and values in creating effective responses to human needs. The legacy that Millbrook leaves for future generations includes not just successful sanctuary operations, but also demonstration that ordinary people can organize themselves to create extraordinary results when they commit themselves to working together for the common good. The community's success provides hope and inspiration for people throughout the world who are seeking alternatives to social and economic systems that prioritize individual advantage over collective welfare, competition over cooperation, and short-term profit over long-term sustainability. The continuity that connects past, present, and future in Millbrook's ongoing sanctuary work demonstrates that meaningful social change requires not dramatic revolutions but patient, persistent effort by people who understand that creating better communities requires daily commitment to values and practices that prioritize human welfare over convenience, healing over judgment, and hope over fear. As winter approaches and the community prepares for another season of reflection and renewal, the people of Millbrook carry forward traditions that have been refined over generations while adapting to new opportunities and challenges that come with their expanded role in a network of communities that are quietly transforming the possibilities for human cooperation and mutual support. Lights that shine from windows throughout Millbrook each evening represent not just individual households but beacons of hope for people throughout the world who are working to create communities where everyone has access to safety, healing, and the opportunity to build lives that reflect their deepest values and highest aspirations. These lights shine as symbols of the enduring human capacity to create sanctuary in a world that often seems dominated by fear and violence, demonstrating that alternative approaches to social organization are not just possible but essential for creating a future where Everyone can thrive. Sleep now in the knowledge that the work continues, that communities like Millbrook exist throughout the world, and that the values they represent offer hope for creating a future where sanctuary and healing are available to everyone who needs them. Rest well, knowing that your own community contains possibilities for mutual aid and collective care that await only your willingness to begin the patient, persistent work of building relationships and systems that prioritize human welfare over individual advantage, cooperation over competition, and hope over fear. Winter settles over Millbrook with the familiar embrace of a season that has witnessed countless cycles of reflection and renewal, each one adding depth to the community's understanding of how patience and persistence can create transformation that extends far beyond the boundaries of any single place or generation. The snow that covers the valley creates a blanket of quiet that allows for the kind of deep thinking and careful planning that prepares communities for the challenges and opportunities that emerge with each new season of sanctuary work. Sarah Chun sits in this library's reading room on quiet evenings, surrounded by the archives that now document not just Millbrook's history, but the evolution of an entire movement toward community-based approaches to human welfare and social organization. Her work coordinating the regional archive project has revealed patterns of innovation and adaptation that demonstrate how isolated experiments in mutual aid have evolved into sophisticated networks of cooperation that span continents and serve populations that government and institutional systems have been unable to protect or support effectively. The correspondence that flows through the library includes letters from communities in distant countries where people have adapted sanctuary principles to their own cultural contexts and social circumstances, creating variations on themes of mutual aid and collective responsibility that demonstrate the universal applicability of values that prioritize human welfare over bureaucratic procedures and legal technicalities. These international connections provide both inspiration and practical knowledge that strengthens local sanctuary work while contributing to global movements toward more compassionate and effective approaches to social organization. Dr. Matthews prepares curriculum materials for the medical school's new distance learning programs, educational resources that will allow healthcare providers throughout the sanctuary network to develop skills and knowledge that enable them to serve populations whose circumstances require adaptation of CONVENTIONO medical practices. His work includes not just technical medical training, but also guidance in the interpersonal skills and cultural sensitivity that allow healthcare providers to build trust and provide effective care to people whose previous experiences with medical systems may have been traumatic or disappointing. The medical research that emerges from sanctuary community healthcare practices contributes to broader understanding of how social environment and community support affect physical and mental health outcomes, providing evidence that holistic approaches to healthcare can achieve better results than narrow focus on individual treatment without attention to social and economic factors that influence overall well-being. This research supports advocacy for healthcare policy changes that would integrate community-based approaches into CONVENTIO medical systems while protecting the autonomy and flexibility that make sanctuary healthcare effective. The Murphy Farm's agricultural innovations have been documented and shared with farming communities throughout the world, creating a global network of agricultural workers who have developed sustainable farming practices that integrate food production with workforce development and therapeutic programming for people who benefit from meaningful outdoor work while they recover from trauma and prepare for new phases of their lives. These agricultural networks provide both practical knowledge sharing and economic cooperation that strengthens local food systems while creating opportunities for people to build skills and confidence through participation in essential work. Timothy's role has evolved from local farm manager to international consultant who helps communities throughout the world develop agricultural programs that serve multiple functions within sanctuary operations. His travels take him to places where people are adapting farming techniques to different climates and cultural contexts, but always with the same underlying commitment to creating work opportunities that provide both economic sustainability and therapeutic benefits for people who need time and structure while they heal and plan for their futures. Margaret Sullivan's training programs for emotional support specialists have expanded to include online courses and mentorship opportunities that connect experienced sanctuary workers with people who want to develop skills in conflict resolution, crisis counseling, and resource coordination. Her curriculum emphasizes the importance of cultural sensitivity and personal boundaries while providing practical guidance for people who want to contribute to sanctuary work but need training in the complex interpersonal skills that effective community support requires. The workshops and conferences that Margaret organizes bring together people from diverse backgrounds and communities who share commitment to mutual aid and collective responsibility, but need opportunities to learn from each other's experiences and develop new approaches to emerging challenges. These gatherings create networks of personal and professional relationships that strengthen sanctuary work while providing ongoing education and support for people who have dedicated their lives to this demanding but essential work. Grace Kim's resource management network has evolved into an international system that helps people throughout the world convert assets from previous lives into resources they can use in new circumstances, creating economic opportunities that provide both immediate assistance and long-term sustainability for sanctuary operations. The network includes not just businesses that deal in used goods and valuable items, but also financial institutions, legal services, and educational organizations that provide comprehensive support for people who need to build new identities and new lives in safer environments. The innovations in asset management and identity transition that emerge from Grace's work contribute to broader understanding of how economic systems can be organized to serve human needs rather than institutional requirements, providing models for alternative approaches to banking, insurance, and financial planning that prioritize accessibility and flexibility over profit maximization and bureaucratic control. Mrs. Patterson's grocery store continues to serve its essential functions in Millbrook sanctuary operations while also serving as a model for business practices that integrate community service with commercial sustainability. The training programs she has developed for other business owners provide guidance in inventory management, customer service, and communication coordination that enables businesses throughout the sanctuary network to contribute to community welfare while maintaining profitable operations that serve both sanctuary and conventional customers. The business networks that have developed around Mrs. Patterson's innovations create opportunities for economic cooperation and resource sharing that strengthen local economies while providing employment and training opportunities for people who benefit from flexible work arrangements during their transitions to new lives and new circumstances. Thomas's innovations in memorial and burial practices have been adapted by communities throughout the world, creating new approaches to honoring lives and deaths that occur under circumstances requiring special sensitivity and discretion. His work contributes to broader understanding of how grief and remembrance can be supported through community practices that respect both individual emotional needs and collective security requirements. The memorial practices that emerge from Thomas's work demonstrate how communities can create meaningful rituals and commemorative traditions that serve spiritual and emotional functions while maintaining the practical requirements that protect living community members from potential risks or complications that might arise from conventional funeral and burial procedures. Eleanor Hartwell's role as elder advisor for the Sanctuary Network has created opportunities for wisdom sharing and mentorship that connect older community members with younger people who are preparing to assume leadership responsibilities in sanctuary work. Her guidance helps bridge generational differences while preserving essential knowledge and values that must be transmitted to future leaders who will adapt sanctuary practices to changing circumstances and emergent challenges. The elder councils that have developed around Eleanor's leadership provide governance structures for the sanctuary network that balance local autonomy with regional coordination, ensuring that individual communities maintain their distinctive characters and practices, while participating in broader movements towards social and economic transformation that require cooperation and mutual support across cultural and geographical boundaries. The children and young people who have grown up in sanctuary communities represent a generation that combines deep understanding of mutual aid principles with contemporary knowledge and skills that enable them to adapt these traditions to technological and social changes that create both new opportunities and new challenges for community-based approaches to human welfare and social organization. Educational programs that prepare young people for leadership in sanctuary work include both formal academic training and experiential learning, opportunities that allow them to develop practical skills while contributing to ongoing community operations. These programs ensure that sanctuary communities will continue to have leadership that understands both traditional practices and innovative approaches to emerging social needs. Anna Whitmore's return to Millbrook represents not just personal reconciliation, but also symbolic completion of cycles that connect past and future through ongoing commitment to values and practices that transcend individual lifetimes and personal circumstances. Her decision to establish a new sanctuary community in the region where she now lives demonstrates how Millbrook's influence continues to expand through people who carry its lessons and values to new places and new situations at the new communities that emerge from the seeds planted by Millbrook's example, create variations on sanctuary themes that reflect different cultural contexts and social circumstances while maintaining core commitments to mutual aid, collective responsibility, and human welfare that define the essential character of effective sanctuary work regardless of local adaptations and innovations. As winter deepens and the community settles into the quiet rhythms that prepare for another cycle of renewal and growth, the people of Millbrook reflect on the remarkable transformation that has occurred over generations of patient work, from a single community providing refuge for a few desperate people to a hub in a global network that demonstrates alternative approaches to social organization based on cooperation rather than competition, healing rather than punishment, and hope rather than fear. The circles that connect past, present, and future in Millbrook's ongoing sanctuary work demonstrate that meaningful change occurs not through dramatic revolutions, but through persistent commitment to values and practices that create immediate improvements in individual lives while building foundations for broader social transformation that may take generations to achieve, but provides hope and direction for everyone who believes that better communities are possible. Spring returns once more to Millbrook, carrying with it the accumulated wisdom of countless seasons that have witnessed the gentle transformation of a small valley community into a beacon of hope for people throughout the world who are working to create alternatives to social systems that have failed to protect the most vulnerable members of society. The river that flows through the town carries the same clear water that has nourished this valley for centuries, but now it also carries the hopes and dreams of people who have discovered that sanctuary and healing are not accidents but achievements that require ongoing commitment to values that prioritize human welfare over institutional convenience. The morning mist that rises from the river's surface reflects light that has witnessed remarkable changes in how human communities can organize themselves around principles of mutual aid and collective responsibility, creating places where everyone has access to safety, healing, and the opportunity to build lives that reflect their deepest values and highest aspirations. This light illuminates not just the familiar landscape of home, but also the expanding network of communities that have adapted Millbrook's example to their own circumstances and cultural contexts. Sarah Chun begins each day with gratitude for the opportunity to serve as coordinator for archives that now preserve the stories and institutional knowledge of sanctuary communities throughout the world, ensuring that the wisdom accumulated over generations of sanctuary work will be available to guide future communities while honoring the contributions of countless individuals who dedicated their lives to creating alternatives to systems that failed to protect people who needed help the most. The library's collection has expanded to include materials in dozens of languages, reflecting the global reach of movements toward community-based approaches to human welfare and social organization. The reading room that once served primarily local residents now welcomes visitors from distant countries who come to study sanctuary practices and principles that have demonstrated remarkable success in creating communities where everyone can thrive regardless of their background, circumstances, or previous experiences. Dr. Matthews continues his work training healthcare providers who serve sanctuary communities and other alternative social organizations, but his role has evolved to include research and advocacy that demonstrates how community-based approaches to healthcare can achieve better outcomes than conventional medical systems that focus on individual treatment without attention to social and environmental factors that influence overall well-being. The medical school's graduates now practice throughout the world, adapting healthcare approaches developed in sanctuary communities to serve populations in conventional settings while maintaining the values and practices that make community-based healthcare effective. Their work contributes to broader transformation of medical education and practice that recognizes the importance of social support and community connection in promoting health and healing. The Murphy Farm continues to serve its essential functions in Millbrook's sanctuary operations, while also hosting visitors from agricultural communities throughout the world who come to study farming practices that integrate food production with workforce development and therapeutic programming. The farm's success demonstrates that agricultural work can serve multiple functions within community-based approaches to social organization, providing both economic sustainability and meaningful opportunities for people who benefit from outdoor work while they heal and plan for their futures. Timothy's consulting work takes him to places where people are, developing agricultural programs that serve sanctuary functions in diverse climates and cultural contexts, but always with the same underlying commitment to creating work opportunities that provide both practical skills and emotional healing for people who need time and structure while they prepare for whatever comes next in their journeys toward new lives and new possibilities. Margaret Sullivan's training programs have evolved into an international institute that provides education and support for people who want to develop skills in emotional support, conflict resolution, and resource coordination that enable them to contribute effectively to sanctuary work in their own communities. The Institute's curriculum emphasizes cultural sensitivity and personal boundaries while providing practical guidance for people who want to dedicate their lives to mutual aid and collective care. The graduates of Margaret's programs now work throughout the world, creating networks of trained support specialists who can provide assistance during crises while also helping communities develop long-term approaches to social organization that prevent many problems from becoming crises in the first place. Their work demonstrates that investing in community capacity building and relationship development creates more effective and sustainable approaches to human welfare than crisis intervention and individual treatment. Grace Kim's Resource Management Network has become a global system that helps people throughout the world transition assets and build new identities while contributing to economic development that prioritizes human welfare over profit maximization. The network includes businesses, financial institutions, educational organizations, and legal services that provide comprehensive support for people who need to create new lives, while also contributing to community development and social transformation. The innovations in economic organization that emerge from Grace's work demonstrate that alternative approaches to banking, commerce, and resource distribution can serve human needs more effectively than conventional economic systems while creating opportunities for cooperation and mutual support that strengthen communities and improve individual well-being. Mrs. Patterson's grocery store remains at the heart of Millbrook Sanctuary operations while serving as a model for business practices that integrate community service with commercial sustainability. The business networks that have developed around her innovations create economic opportunities and resource-sharing arrangements that strengthen local economies throughout the sanctuary network while providing employment and training for people who benefit from flexible work during their transitions to new circumstances. The economic cooperation that emerges from these business networks demonstrates that commercial activity can serve community welfare rather than individual profit, creating models for economic development that prioritize sustainability, cooperation, and social responsibility over competition and wealth accumulation. Thomas continues his essential work maintaining memorial sites and providing burial services that honor lives and deaths occurring under circumstances requiring special sensitivity, while also training people throughout the world who want to develop similar practices in their own communities. His work contributes to understanding of how grief and remembrance can be supported through community practices that serve both emotional and spiritual needs while maintaining practical requirements for security and discretion. The memorial traditions that develop around Thomas's innovations create new approaches to commemorating lives and processing loss that strengthen community bonds while providing healing opportunities for people who have experienced trauma and loss under difficult circumstances. Eleanor Hartwell's wisdom and guidance continue to benefit not just Millbrook, but the entire sanctuary network through elder councils that provide governance structures balancing local autonomy with regional coordination. Her influence extends to young people throughout the world who are preparing to assume leadership responsibilities in sanctuary work, ensuring that essential knowledge and values are transmitted to future generations who will adapt these traditions to circumstances that cannot yet be anticipated. The governance innovations that emerge from Eleanor's leadership demonstrate that effective decision-making and conflict resolution can be achieved through consensus building and relationship maintenance rather than hierarchical authority and bureaucratic procedures, creating models for democratic participation and collective responsibility that strengthen communities while respecting individual autonomy and cultural diversity. The young people who have grown up in sanctuary communities represent hope for continued evolution and adaptation of mutual aid principles to changing technological, social, and environmental circumstances. Their education includes both deep understanding of traditional sanctuary practices and contemporary knowledge that enables them to address emerging challenges while preserving essential values and relationships that make community-based approaches to human welfare effective and sustainable. Anna Whitmore's new sanctuary community demonstrates how Millbrook's influence continues to expand through people who carry its lessons to new places and new situations, creating variations on sanctuary themes that reflect different cultural contexts while maintaining core commitments to mutual aid and collective responsibility. Her success provides inspiration and practical knowledge for other communities that want to develop their own approaches to sanctuary work. The global network of sanctuary communities that has emerged from seeds planted in Millbrook demonstrates that alternative approaches to social organization are not just possible but essential for creating a future where everyone has access to safety, healing, and opportunity. These communities provide hope and direction for broader social transformation while offering immediate assistance to people who need sanctuary and support. As evening settles over Millbrook and lights begin to appear in windows throughout the town, the familiar rituals of community life continue with the satisfaction that comes from knowing that this work extends far beyond local boundaries to influence movements throughout the world toward more compassionate and effective approaches to human welfare and social organization. The river continues its patient journey toward distant places, carrying with it the hopes and dreams of people who have discovered that creating sanctuary requires not dramatic gestures but persistent commitment to daily practices of kindness, cooperation, and mutual support that transform communities one relationship at a time. The mist that will rise with tomorrow's dawn will carry light that illuminates possibilities for human cooperation and community care that extend far beyond what any single generation can achieve, but provide direction and hope for everyone who believes that better communities are possible when people commit themselves to working together for the common good. Sleep now in the knowledge that the work continues, that communities throughout the world are discovering what becomes possible when people organize themselves around principles of mutual aid and collective responsibility, and that your own participation in this ongoing transformation toward more compassionate and effective approaches to human welfare contributes to hope and healing that extends far beyond what you may ever know or see. Rest peacefully, knowing that sanctuary exists wherever people choose to create it, that healing is possible even in the most difficult circumstances, and that the future holds possibilities for human cooperation and community care that await only our willingness to begin the patient, persistent work of building relationships and systems that prioritize human welfare over individual advantage, cooperation over competition, and hope over fear. The gentle rhythms that have sustained Millbrook through countless seasons continue to provide guidance and comfort for people throughout the world who are working to create places where everyone can find safety, healing, and the opportunity to build lives that reflect their deepest values and highest aspirations. These rhythms remind us that meaningful change occurs through accumulated small acts of kindness and cooperation rather than dramatic events, through persistent commitment to values rather than temporary enthusiasm, and through building relationships that last generations rather than seeking quick solutions to complex problems. Thank you for accompanying me through these stories of sanctuary and healing, for allowing these gentle narratives to provide comfort as you prepare for rest, and for carrying with you the understanding that creating sanctuary is among the most important work that human beings can do together. May your dreams be filled with the same peaceful confidence that settles each night over the river valley where Millbrook continues its eternal work of healing and hope. And may you wake tomorrow with renewed commitment to creating sanctuary wherever you are, in whatever ways your circumstances allow. The seasons turn once more in Millbrook, but now they carry something different in their rhythm, something that speaks not just of cycles that repeat, but of spirals that ascend, each revolution bringing deeper understanding and broader connection to the timeless work of creating sanctuary in a world that desperately needs places where healing can flourish without condition or limitation. The river that has witnessed so many transformations continues its patient journey, but now its waters reflect not just the familiar landscape of this particular valley, but glimpses of possibilities that extend far beyond what any single community can achieve alone. Sarah Shun sits in the library on a quiet evening, surrounded by correspondence that arrives now from places she once could never have imagined. Letters written in languages she is still learning to read, but all carrying the same essential message of gratitude for knowledge shared and hope for wisdom that continues to grow through collaboration and mutual support. The archive project she coordinates has become something far more significant than preservation of historical records, evolving into a living repository of human wisdom about how communities can organize themselves around principles that honor the dignity and potential of every person who seeks refuge and renewal. The children who visit the library after school now include not just local residents but young people from sanctuary communities throughout the world, participants in exchange programs that create understanding and friendship across cultural boundaries while providing practical education in the skills and values that will enable them to carry sanctuary work into circumstances and challenges that their elders cannot yet envision. Their laughter and curiosity remind everyone that the work of creating sanctuary is ultimately about building a future where such places will be unnecessary because entire societies will be organized around principles of mutual aid and collective care. Dr. Matthews reviews medical reports that arrive from healthcare providers in distant countries, documentation of healing outcomes that demonstrate how community-based approaches to healthcare can address not just physical symptoms but underlying social and emotional conditions that conventional medical systems have been unable to treat effectively. The research that emerges from this global network of sanctuary healthcare providers contributes to understanding that human well-being depends not just on individual treatment, but on social environments that support resilience, growth, and authentic connection to community and purpose. Asterisk. The medical innovations that develop through this international collaboration include not only new treatment approaches but also prevention strategies that address root causes of illness and trauma, creating models for public health that prioritize community development and social support over individual intervention and crisis management. These innovations demonstrate that healthcare can be reimagined as community care, with medical professionals serving as facilitators of healing rather than authorities who diagnose and treat isolated individuals. The Murphy Farm welcomes visitors throughout the growing season. Agricultural workers and community organizers who come to study farming practices that have proven effective in diverse climates and cultural contexts while maintaining their essential functions of providing meaningful work and therapeutic engagement for people who benefit from connection to land and growing things. The knowledge shared through these visits creates networks of sustainable agriculture that serve both environmental and social healing functions. Timothy's travels now take him to places where environmental restoration and community healing intersect, regions where sanctuary communities are developing agricultural practices that repair damaged ecosystems while providing opportunities for people to participate in work that connects personal healing to planetary healing. These innovations demonstrate that caring for people and caring for the earth are not separate activities but aspects of the same essential work of creating conditions that support life and growth. Margaret Sullivan's training programs have evolved to include not just interpersonal skills, but also training in community organizing and social change, strategies that enable people to address systemic causes of trauma and displacement, rather than only responding to individual crises. The institute she leads now offers education in policy advocacy, economic development, and cultural transformation that prepares sanctuary workers to engage with larger social systems while maintaining the values and practices that make their work effective. Graduates of Margaret's programs work not only in sanctuary communities, but also in conventional social service agencies, healthcare systems, educational institutions, and government organizations, bringing sanctuary principles and practices into mainstream institutions while maintaining connections to community-based alternatives that provide models for more effective approaches to human welfare and social organization. Grace Kim's resource management network has expanded to include not just asset transition services but also community investment programs that direct resources toward local economic development in regions where sanctuary communities are emerging. These investment strategies prioritize environmental sustainability, social equity, and community control over external ownership and profit extraction, creating economic models that serve human welfare rather than wealth accumulation. The financial innovations that emerge from Grace's work demonstrate that economic systems can be organized to serve community needs rather than corporate interests, providing practical examples of how banking, investment, and commerce can support social transformation while maintaining the economic viability necessary for long-term sustainability and Growth. Mrs. Patterson's business model has been adapted by commercial enterprises throughout the world, creating networks of businesses that integrate community service with commercial operations while maintaining the profitability necessary for economic sustainability. These business networks provide employment and training opportunities while also serving essential functions in sanctuary operations, demonstrating that commerce can be organized around principles of mutual benefit rather than competitive advantage. The cooperative principles that guide these business networks create economic relationships that strengthen communities while providing goods and services that meet genuine human needs rather than manufactured desires created by advertising and marketing systems designed to promote consumption rather than well-being. Thomas's innovations in memorial and burial practices have influenced broader conversations about death and grief in societies that have lost traditional rituals and community support systems for processing loss and honoring the lives of people who die under circumstances that challenge conventional assumptions about meaning and value. His work contributes to development of new approaches to end-of-life care that integrate medical, spiritual, and community resources to provide comprehensive support for dying people and their families. Asterisk. The memorial traditions that emerge from Thomas's innovations create opportunities for communities to process collective grief and trauma while honoring the lives of people whose deaths might otherwise be ignored or forgotten by larger society. These practices demonstrate that meaningful commemoration can occur without conventional religious or institutional frameworks, creating space for diverse approaches to spirituality and meaning-making. Eleanor Hartwell's wisdom continues to guide not just sanctuary communities but also broader movements towards social transformation that seek to create entire societies organized around principles of mutual aid and collective responsibility. Her influence extends through mentorship relationships with leaders throughout the world who are working to adapt sanctuary principles to political and economic systems that currently prioritize individual wealth accumulation over community welfare. The governance innovations that develop around Eleanor's guidance demonstrate that effective decision-making can occur through consensus building and relationship maintenance rather than hierarchical authority and bureaucratic procedures, providing models for democratic participation that honor both individual autonomy and collective responsibility while maintaining the flexibility necessary for adaptation to changing circumstances. Anna Whitmore's sanctuary community has become a model for rapid development of effective sanctuary operations, demonstrating that communities can be established quickly when they have access to accumulated wisdom and support from established sanctuary networks. Her success provides encouragement for people throughout the world who want to create sanctuary communities but fear that the process requires resources or expertise that are beyond their reach. The new communities that emerge through adaptation of Millbrook's example demonstrate that sanctuary principles can be implemented in diverse social and economic contexts while maintaining their essential character and effectiveness. These communities provide hope that sanctuary can become not just an alternative to mainstream social organization, but a foundation for broader transformation toward more compassionate and effective approaches to human welfare. The global network of sanctuary communities now includes not just rural towns like Millbrook, but also urban neighborhoods, suburban communities, and even networks of individuals who create sanctuary relationships within conventional institutional settings. This diversity demonstrates that sanctuary is not dependent on particular geographical or economic circumstances, but can emerge wherever people commit themselves to creating relationships and systems that prioritize human welfare over institutional convenience. The research and documentation that emerges from this global network provides evidence that community-based approaches to social organization can address problems that conventional government and institutional systems have been unable to solve, creating practical, demonstrations of alternative possibilities that inspire hope and provide direction for broader social transformation. As autumn deepens in Millbrook and the community prepares for another winter of reflection and renewal, the people who have dedicated their lives to sanctuary work take satisfaction in knowing that their efforts have contributed to movements that now span continents and serve populations that government and institutional systems have abandoned or failed to protect effectively. The lights that shine from windows throughout Millbrook each evening now represent not just individual households, but nodes in a network of hope that extends throughout the world, connecting people who share commitment to creating places where everyone can find safety, healing, and opportunity, regardless of their circumstances or background. The river continues its ancient journey toward the sea, carrying with it the accumulated hopes and dreams of countless people who have discovered that sanctuary is not just a place but a practice, not just a destination but a way of traveling through life with attention to the welfare of others and commitment to creating conditions that support healing and growth for everyone. The whispers of tomorrow that drift through Millbrook's quiet streets speak of possibilities that extend far beyond what any single generation can achieve, but provide direction and hope for everyone who believes that better communities are possible when people commit themselves to working together for the common good rather than competing for individual advantage. Sleep now in the knowledge that the work continues to grow and spread throughout the world, that communities everywhere are discovering what becomes possible when people organize themselves around principles of mutual aid and collective responsibility, and that your own participation in this ongoing transformation contributes to hope and healing that extends far beyond what you may ever know or see. Rest peacefully, knowing that tomorrow brings new opportunities to create sanctuary wherever you are, in whatever ways your circumstances allow, and that the gentle rhythms that have sustained Millbrook through countless seasons provide guidance and comfort for everyone who seeks to build communities where love and justice can flourish together in practical, sustainable ways that honor both individual dignity and collective well-being.